The Speaker.
Member for St. Joseph, you have 20 minutes and 42 seconds of original time left.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as I resume after lunch, I think I have responded to the member for Oropouche East and the member for St. Augustine. Madam Speaker, I now want to turn to the actual act and talk to the people of Trinidad and Tobago directly to ease their fears about some of the matters being raised opposite. Madam Speaker, the AG obviously in piloting the bill can't touch on every single clause. And I want to start to comfort all business owners, small, medium, and large, from the doubles vendor right up, to pay particular attention to Clause 11 of the bill. So I'm going to start to run through some clauses of the bill. Clause 11 of the bill speaks to internal disclosures. And I just want to put on the Hansard the following. An employer shall appoint and keep in his employ such whistleblowing reporting officers as are required for the purposes of this Act. And this is where Oropouche East had some discomfort with, thinking that every single business had to have a whistleblowing unit and employ people. This is for corporations, as I indicated earlier, the larger ones like the Atlantic LNGs, the Angosturas, and so on. However, Madam Speaker, when one goes on to read the Act, under Division 3, External Disclosures, clauses 14, 15, this is where I want to comfort the population that even though a private entity, whether small, medium, or large, does not have the wherewithal to set up a whistleblowing unit, a whistleblower in any of these entities, from the doubles vendor, to the grocery, to the hardware, to the pharmacy, to whatever, they can go to a designated authority. And this is where I really want to respond to Oropouche East. Division 3, External Disclosures, and we are dealing with this for the first time. A designated authority shall have a whistleblowing reports unit consisting of a director and such other officers as are required for the efficient performance of functions of the unit. And who are these designated authorities? There are 21 designated authorities in the schedule. It starts, I'm not going to call out all 21, but it starts with 1, the Auditor General's Department, and it goes down to 21 in alphabetical order to the Trinidad and Tobago Securities Exchange Commission. So, for example, Madam Speaker, if in both a private or public sector, any employee who wishes to be a whistleblower, if it has something to do with taxation, they can make a report to who? The Board of Inland Revenue. This has been explained to the public for the first time. If it has to do with bringing in substandard goods from any part of the country, whether it's substandard electrical products and it's fraud, who can they go to? The Bureau of Standards. If it has to do with children, they can go to the Children's Authority. If it has to do, and this is very common in Trinidad and Tobago, containers coming in unexamined, invoices being under-invoiced, that is white-collar crime. You want to whistleblow on that, you can go to whom? The Customs and Excise Division. If it's something to do with elections, you go to the Elections and Boundaries Commission. So there are 21 agencies who are designated authorities under this piece of legislation, where if a private sector organization does not have a unit and a whistleblower wishes to make a report, he has a suite of 21, a menu of 21 agencies to choose from. Has to do with procurement, Office of Procurement regulations. It has to do with health and safety. You can go to the Occupational Health and Safety Organization. You have something against the MP, you can go to the Integrity Commission. And it goes on and on and on. And I want the population to understand this point, because it needs repeating. Not all private sector organizations need to set up this unit. An employee could go to one of these 21 designated entities. And it goes on in Section 15. And I want to put Section 15 on the record. Section 15 says, an employee of any organization, and Madam Speaker, that is crucial, an employee of an organization, any organization, may make an external disclosure to the whistleblowing reports unit of a designated authority. And 15A, the organization, if the organization has no internal procedures established. I want population, I want the reasonable man in society to understand that. Because what is being peddled here today, and I'll say this for the last time, is that every organization has to set up this unit. The answer is not so. So, Madam Speaker, let's not trivialize and minimize the seriousness of this piece of legislation. Madam Speaker, I now want to move on to section Part 4 of the Act, Section 23. Madam Speaker, the member for Oropouche East, in his usual style of trivializing serious matters, spoke about the poolman, the gardener in your house seeing something. This legislation is to tackle serious white-collar crime. And Part 4, which is Section 23(1)(a) to E on page 18, talks about where a person commits an offense if he knowingly prevents, restrains, restricts any person from making an internal or external disclosure. In other words, if the reasonable person in society, and the reasonable person in society is defined in law, the man on the Clapham bus, but we use the local example, the man in the maxi taxi from La Joqueta or San Fernando or anywhere. The officious bystander. If that type of person commits an offense, then he's not a reasonable person. He is not to knowingly debar anybody, any whistleblower, from making a report. Similarly, in B, and we are dealing with this for the first time here, he cannot knowingly intimidate someone. And Oropouche East, again, tried to scare the population about intimidation, about witness tampering, and witness protection. You cannot knowingly induce any person by threats, promises, or otherwise to contravene this act. So what the Attorney General was saying in his piloting, there are safeguards. There are safeguards. So don't try to bring in the poolman, the gardener. This is not what this act is about. Madam Speaker, I want to deal lastly with the schedule, and this is important, Madam Speaker. In some detail, I have mentioned it. Madam Speaker, just by way of example, there was a case in the United States of a whistleblower who went to the authorities about a company she was working with that was producing nuclear power. And they found that in her body, in her house, she had plutonium readings way off the charts. And she blew the whistle on that particular company. And I think they had to pay out, in those days, $1.6 million if correct. And that case became a cause célèbre and eventually was made into a movie, and some people may know the movie called Silkwood. Her name, Silkwood. It became a very famous movie about whistleblowing. Silkwood. I would Silkwood, S-I-L-K-W-O-O-D. I would advise anybody, both opposition and government, if you are serious about whistleblowing, to read that case, read what that person had to go through. I think I have it here. If I could just refer to it briefly, Madam Speaker, with your permission. She was called Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood. And the company had to settle out of court for 1.38 million US, even though they did not admit liability. Madam Speaker, this is scary. And this is the importance of having whistleblowing legislation. It is not only about white-collar crime. It is about any type of fraud, I can't use the word lying, misrepresentation. A person in their job, because one of the designated authorities under this act is the Occupational Safety and Health Authority. These are very important matters that touch workers, because Oropuch East was talking about workers' rights. So this gives the worker who is working in an unsafe environment the opportunity to go to the occupational safety and health and make a report. I commend this article on Karen Silkwood as compulsory reading if we are serious. Madam Speaker, the last point I want to make on these designated authorities, and I started to touch on it before the lunch break, is that today is a line in the sand. Let us start to signal to the population how serious we are. No bill, as the Prime Minister said, is going to be perfect. We know that. Our friends were in government, they would have brought imperfect pieces of legislation, and we would have supported it. We would go to the courts and sort that out afterwards, or you come back with amendments. But let us signal to Trinidad and Tobago, to the red, white, and black, that we are serious. And I want to make special reference, Madam Speaker, to designated authorities 1, 2, 11, and 21. These are the ones I am very serious about. Designated Authority 1 is the Auditor General's Department. Designated Authority 2 is the Board of Inland Revenue. 11, the FIU, Financial Intelligence Unit. And 21, the Trinidad and Tobago Securities and Exchange Commission. And let us, as 41 intelligent, patriotic people, admit to the country that one of the biggest frauds ever perpetrated has to be securities, issuing of shares, and so on. Madam Speaker, the law will evolve. Let us pass this piece of legislation today, because the manipulation of shares around the world is an issue, white-collar crime. The United States learned the hard way that sometimes you need to bring more specific pieces of legislation to deal with specific issues. So for instance, they passed the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, I believe about 19 years ago, to deal specifically with fraud in the securities industry. Madam Speaker, it is no secret in Trinidad and Tobago that under the Securities Exchange Commission, which is listed Designated Authority 21, that agency, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, could have benefited significantly if we had specific laws like Sarbanes-Oxley to get to the bottom of the issuance of shares, especially the IPO for First Citizens Bank. That remains a stain on this country up to today. And we have had no response from the SEC as to what happened in that FCB IPO of 2013 or 14. None. Manipulation of the shares, manipulation of that initial public offering. And these are the type of high white-collar crime issues we are trying to address with this piece of legislation. has nothing to do with the pool man, has nothing to do with the gardener, has nothing to do with the doubles vendor. So, Madam Speaker, in coming to a close, this piece of legislation is as wide as it is broad, as it is deep. And it is necessary. It is necessary to send a signal to the outside world, whether it's FACTA, whether it's Global Forum, whether it's FATF, whether it's CFATF, and whether it's to the reasonable man in the maxi taxi from San Fernando or La Joquita, we have your back. We have your back. Because white-collar crime has gone unpunished for too long. Madam Speaker, I urge the opposition to stand up with the red, white, and black today. Stand up for what is right. Stand up for the weak in society. And Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Member for Tabakit.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I'm very happy to join in this debate, as essentially it is a piece of legislation that purports to create a society that adheres to a higher level of integrity, a higher level of personal and collective morality, and also to bring about a sense of justice to those who stand on the platform of truth and honesty. Madam Speaker, when the Honourable Member for Diego Martin West spoke, and also the Attorney General, the member for San Fernando West, they both referred to the length of time that this particular bill has been before the Parliament, whether it's at the Joint Select or when it was first brought before the Parliament, I believe in December of 2015. And it has been long in coming in terms of getting the debate going. But that, of course, they seem to infer that it's being placed at the feet of that delay is being placed at the feet of the opposition. Madam Speaker, the government must recognize that it is in charge of the affairs of the government, and in terms of ensuring that legislation proceeds at a pace that is not inimical to the progress of the society, and therefore to infer that the opposition is somehow to blame for this, I don't think it's accurate. I think what has to be remembered is that the opposition has always taken the position that it will support good legislation, as we did on the Explain Your Wealth bill. I think that our support of that surprised even the government. But we live in the same society, and it is our intention to build a proper society. Madam Speaker, I want to start by taking a bit of a philosophical approach to this whole matter. I think it's important. Morality in public life should not be an elusive goal, although it seems and appears to be an elusive goal. I want to refer to a sacred text by which I'm often guided in decision making, and it is the Bhagavad Gita. And like the Bible, like the Quran, in which important self-revealing questions are asked, there's a question that is asked by a disciple to his teacher, who happened to be Lord Krishna. And the disciple's name was Arjuna. And the question was a very simple one. He said, what is it, he asked his teacher, what it is that propels or drives an individual to commit sin, though he knows to the best of his knowledge that it is a wrong action he's about to do. There's no one in this world, unless you are really severely mentally deranged, that does not know the difference between right and wrong. But yet something propels us to engage in wrong action, even though we know there are consequences for those wrong actions, and even though we know the action is against the common good of society. And as politicians, or as a politician, I see this legislation also as important for the common good. For the common good. And whatever we do in this parliament should always have that focus in mind. What is the common good And are we acting for the common good? Madam Speaker, why is a person therefore impelled, he asks, to commit sinful acts, even though unwillingly, as if by force, is the sentence used? And the teacher replied, the Lord replied, it is lust. It is greed alone, which is born out of contact with the mode of passion and later transferred into anger. Know this, greed, lust, as a sinful, all-devouring enemy in the world. And Madam Speaker, that's where I want to begin. Because the root of our problem, when we talk about corruption and when we talk about integrity in public life and morality, is really about greed. Personal greed, collective greed, community greed, national greed is about greed. Lust for worldly enjoyment is the cause of many of our wrongdoings. And it is the malignant allure sitting within all of us. We believe that worldly objects will give satisfaction. And so we create this insatiable desire to have them. And when desire is not satisfied, it gives rise to anger. But when desire is satisfied, it gives birth to greed. It's very interesting. And one commits sins under the influence of all three: greed, lust, and anger. One might even go to say that there are three gates leading to hell. Which one are you choosing? Lust, greed, or anger? Madam Speaker, this is a greedy world. And Trinidad and Tobago is not exempt. We are all guilty of greed. Could be greed for clothes, could be greed for a lifestyle, could be greed for so many things. We need, therefore, laws, unfortunately. We need laws to regulate greed. Laws, however, will admonish, laws will punish, or laws will also free you. But there's what I like to call personal law, and I refer to that as ethics. Man's law, like that which we produce in this parliament, and of course there's God's law. There's man's law, there's personal law, or the law of ethics, the rules of ethics, and God's law. And if we were a people, not only here in Trinidad and our society, if we are a people of high ethics, perhaps we would not need whistleblowing legislation. But unfortunately, we are not necessarily a people of high ethics. And the problem is that ethics is the law of the unenforceable. You cannot enforce ethics on anyone. Ethics is a personal choice. A personal choice. It is not enforceable by anyone upon any other. Ethics is about the unenforceable rules for personal conduct. Ethics is what makes you an honest person, a person of integrity, or not. And the bill before us, therefore, is about that which is enforceable. Enforceable, man's law, the law we make in Parliament. But for this particular law, like the Explain Your Wealth Bill, like the anti-gang law, like any one of these laws, for it to be effective, will require in our society citizens, men and women, of stern ability, commitment, and above all, rare courage. Rare courage. Because, Madam Speaker, in this country, we read ever so often, and perhaps too regularly, about witnesses who are supposed to go to court tomorrow, but they are gone down today. And because of fear for one's personal safety, fear for one's life, you're going to find that a rare courage and commitment is required if this law is to work. And my question is, do we have such men and women and children in our country? Let me comment and say this, Madam Speaker, that I find it unfortunate that we do not, like the time I went to school, teach a subject called ethics in our primary schools. Maybe it's taught, I don't know, but I haven't heard much about it for a long time. But ethics, just teaching our children the difference between right and wrong. But I do believe that we have men and women of courage in this country. I believe so. And this legislation will challenge our personal values. The Attorney General referred. There's a legislation about values. It will challenge our personal values. It will challenge our societal values. And this legislation is going to give us a chance to look into our personal as well as our national mirrors and make a decision as to what kinds of citizens we want, what kind of society we wish to become, and what kind of social values we wish to forge. And that's the underpinning of what I see behind this particular piece of legislation. Madam Speaker, there are therefore some important considerations with respect to this bill. But Madam Speaker, when I talked about people of rare courage, we have always had people who wanted right in the country. Somebody earlier on mentioned the name Jean Miles. And Jean Miles, of course, paid the price. There's a very telling story on the Trinidad Guardian of the 6th of May 2003. The Johnny O scandal, Jean Miles, nationalist betrayed. And it is an important story, a story that perhaps should not just be left to be lost, because it reminds us that ever so often a citizen with courageous spark arises in the society to do that which is right. But Madam Speaker, like in her case, you have to be prepared to suffer for doing that which is right. And sometimes you have to suffer against the whole society. You have to live for what you think is the correct thing to do. But Madam Speaker, she suffered. She couldn't get a job after she said what she had to say. And just to quote this article, she neglected her appearance, fell out of, or was shunned by society. She still had her father's home in Glencoe, so she never became a vagrant, but was often seen wandering the city, bedraggled and drunk. And in December 1972, Miles died of a heart attack, and she was only 42 years of age. And there are many Jean Miles in this country. There are many Jean Miles in organizations who suffer the same fate. Let us face it. They are shunned. And Madam Speaker, Transparency International, in a document entitled A Best Practice Guide for Whistleblowing Legislation, put it very well. Whistleblowers often take on high personal risk. They may be fired, sued, blacklisted, arrested, threatened, or in extreme cases, assaulted or killed. Protecting whistleblowers from unfair treatment, including retaliation, discrimination, or disadvantage, can embolden people to report wrongdoing and thus increase the likelihood that wrongdoing is uncovered and penalized. Whistleblowing protection is thus a key means of enhancing openness and accountability in government and corporate workplaces. But Madam Speaker, even so, what is the state of Trinidad and Tobago with respect to our penchant for reporting corruption? In the 2018 report, 17-18 report, 2018 report of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index, some important data is given. And in this report, we are told that Trinidad and Tobago scored 41. And that is on a scale from 0 to 100. So they conclude that this made us more corrupt than countries like South Africa, which scored 43, Saudi Arabia 49, and Jamaica 44. And this report was citing such issues as bribery, government's inability to treat with corruption, and the unwillingness to report on corruption by citizens. And what is really telling in this report is this, that only 37% of Trinidadians and Tobagonians agree with reporting corruption. Only 37% agree with reporting corruption. And this was the lowest compared to countries like Jamaica, 52%, and Costa Rica, 75%. In other parts of the Brazil and Costa Rica and so on, it was 74 and 75%. Now, despite that, 60% of Trinbagonians said not enough was being done to tackle corruption. And 60% say not enough being done, but only 37% saying that they're willing to report corruption. Madam Speaker, what is interesting also is one more statistic that I find very interesting. And the report said that of those surveyed in Trinidad and Tobago, 6% of Trinbagonians paid bribes, one of the lowest rates compared to other Latin American and Caribbean countries. Trinidad and Tobago, to quote, by contrast, had the lowest bribery rate of the countries surveyed. Here, only 6% of people who had come into contact with a public official in the previous 12 months had paid a bribe. And this is the report I thought that I would introduce. But, Madam Speaker, the right of citizens to report wrongdoing is entrenched in their right of freedom of expression and is linked to principles of transparency and integrity. All persons, in my view, have an inherent right to preserve the common good of society. And one of the interesting aspects of this bill, and I'm subject to correction, Mr. Attorney General, if I may, is that I read in Section 7 of the bill that only employees, as it were, can report wrongdoing. That's what the bill does, cover employees. Okay, fine. But I also want to say that if all persons can report wrongdoing like we can to a police station, why can't all persons, not just employees, be able to report wrongdoings in a company or company to a whistleblowing report unit? Why can't they? Why, for example, can't Denise Wren, Asha Javid, what's the crime buster now on CNC Street? Yeah. Mark Bassant, with their really great investigative skills, not journalists, just journalistic investigative skills. What prevents them from being part of the group that can report to a whistleblowing unit?
Nothing. Included.
I'm very happy to hear. But I'm asking the question because in my limited understanding of the law, I couldn't interpret it in the extent you are interpreting it. So it does not. You said it does not limit disclosure to employees. But I want to say another thing to your Attorney General. And might surprise you that the majority, I would say the majority of private companies in Trinidad do not, as of today, realize that this bill also includes them. They don't realize that. And they do not know that they are subject to what is in this bill. And that is part of where we have failed as a government to educate the public on this matter of the whistleblowing legislation so that people who are affected by the bill would know that they are going to be affected by this legislation. And the corporate world in Trinidad and Tobago had better get up and take a second look at this bill. It is unfortunate that so many things pass in this parliament and the public takes a very low level of interest in it until it is there as law and it is assented to and it becomes the law. And then everybody sits up and says, but wait, what has happened? They even say, what have you done as an opposition? You know, that's one of the unfortunate things about this country now. We do not take the active role that we need to take in public affairs. We do not make laws for ourselves in this parliament. We make laws on behalf of the citizens for the common good. And if I one appeal I can make here today is for citizens in this country to take a more active interest. Madam Speaker, it is good that we have television showing what goes on in this parliament. It is excellent. And there are people who follow it more than they follow the soaps. And I think that is great. I know a lot of secondary school students and primary school students who actually tell me they saw me on the television, on the parliamentary channel and what have you. But Madam Speaker, I want to implore the Attorney General that maybe Attorney General, we need to take a time out and give the private sector again an opportunity. Although I looked at the JSC and I saw a list of organizations who appeared before the JSC. But remember, those organizations represent a small group of elite people. But the broader world of corporate existence, in my view, the private sector in particular, they are not in tune with what this bill really means for them, as well as for their employees. So, Madam Speaker, one of the questions I ask is, should disclosures that lead to prosecution, should it be limited only to employees? Look at the Volkswagen emissions scandal. That was first brought to the attention of the authorities by a group of scientists at West Virginia University. And they were not affiliated, the scientists, to Volkswagen in any way. And under the current drafting of this Whistleblowing Act, would such a group be able to disclose information that had as far-reaching legal and financial repercussions as did the scientists who revealed the Volkswagen matter? Madam Speaker, one of the other things I looked at is how many countries have whistleblowing legislation at this stage. And it seems that not a lot of countries in the world. The figure I'm coming up with, subject to correction from the research I've tried to do, is about 50 countries, but more or less just about 12 countries have full-blown whistleblower legislation. So I thought I'd look at the G20 countries to see what was happening in the G20 countries and to what extent they would have such legislation. And when I noted it, Argentina, for example, had no standalone legislation, yet the regulation governing the Anti-Corruption Office grants anonymity to reporting employees. Australia only recently introduced a comprehensive and innovative scheme for most of its public sector, but protection for private sector employees are widely recognized as missing or inadequate in the Australian legislation. Brazil had no specific legislation in place, although a 2013 anti-bribery law encouraged companies to establish whistleblowing channels. Canada, at a national level, protection is granted only in the public sector. NGOs have said the legislation is flawed and ineffective, and so no whistleblower has yet been granted remedy by the tribunal. I'm just pointing to these countries to show the stages of development of whistleblower legislation, even as we battle here, and I make my point about the sensitivity of the private sector to the legislation. China. Legislation formally protects whistleblowers in the private sector, but there are consistent implementation loopholes. France. 3 laws were passed in 2013 to protect whistleblowers in both the private and public sector who expose health and environmental risks, conflict of interest, and financial crimes. The report said it was too early to say how strong the legislation and implementation will be. Germany, no specific whistleblower provision. There are consistent loopholes in the labor law imposing high burdens on whistleblowers, on the whistleblower. In instances of corruption, public officials can turn to external authorities. Protection measures are inconsistently interpreted in the courts. That's Germany. India. The Whistleblower Protection Bill covering Government of India employees was passed in 2014. So very recent. So we as a country must somehow, I would say, congratulate ourselves also that we are beginning to think, in these terms. And it puts me, in my view, intellectually, it puts us out of the third world zone and into a country that, at least has some vision of where moral progress should be going as a society. Indonesia, and I'm still talking about the G20 countries. Indonesia, no standalone legislation. The law on witnesses provides little protection as cases of retaliation and even prosecution against whistleblowers have been reported. So, as I was saying earlier, this is a matter of life and limb. Italy adopted an anti-corruption law in 2012 only, which includes the establishment of whistleblower protection in the public sector, but not in the private sector. Japan, whistleblower legislation covers both public and private sectors, but only in cases where a law has been violated. A new state secrecy law has undermined protection for whistleblowers in the public sector. Korea, legislation protects whistleblowers in the private sector, but again, the implementation is inconsistent. Mexico, there is no legislation directly addressing the issue of whistleblower protection. Russia, a 2013 presidential decree introduced new whistleblower protection measures for public sector employees, although they remain largely inadequate. In fact, in Russia, there is no comprehensive framework existing to protect private sector employees. Saudi Arabia, limited and vague protection for public sector whistleblowers does not extend to the private sector. South Africa, protective legislation in place for private employees and non-employees as well as for public employees. But non-employees operating in the public sector excluded from protection. Turkey, no legislation addressing whistleblower protection. And in the UK and US, what we know is that both possess adequate whistleblowing legislation covering the private and public sectors. So this gives you a broad picture of what is happening internationally. And we could see some actions have been taken as only recently as 3 or 4 years ago. But it also shows that in a lot of cases, the private sector has been excluded from the legislation. Madam Speaker, the other matter I wish to raise is the matter of who is a whistleblower and how can a whistleblower also be protected. Here in our law that we are proposing, the whistleblower, there's an internal unit to which the whistleblower goes, or there's the external unit to which the whistleblower goes. But have we considered whether a whistleblower could go through an attorney? Should we consider that? Jamaica allows for that, by the way. Allows for disclosure through an attorney, and that is in an effort to maintain confidentiality as well as the veracity of the information. And at the University of Greenwich, Greenwich, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Greenwich, researchers at the Public Services International Research Unit have listed several potential whistleblowers. Of course, direct employees of companies, employees of governments or agencies, who of course whistleblow on politicians or officials and or companies, aid workers employed by foreign government, NGO employees of multilateral agencies, example, the World Bank. Accountants and auditors, they are an important category. They must be seeing evidence going across their desks. Auditors and their staff should be able to whistleblow on their clients, whether public authority or company. For example, someone auditing particular books of a company. I don't want to deal with ANV drilling. But let's say they're auditing something and they see something. Should they not be able to report it? Consultants and academic researchers and members of the public. What about trade unions? Trade unions as the representatives of the whistleblower. Should a whistleblower be able to work through his or her trade union in order to report matters? And when disclosures are made, my next point, to the whistleblower report unit, how can it be guaranteed that they are protected disclosures? How can it be guaranteed that they are protected disclosures? Madam Speaker, in this age of advanced technology, there are many different ways in which disclosures can be illegally intercepted. Look, one of the banks is posting on the Facebook all the time, warning people that their bank is affected by illegal interception of their clients' credit card numbers and what have you. It's happening. You know, how do we really, in this age and the advanced technology, protect people? How do we make sure that disclosures are not illegally intercepted? Madam Speaker, you know why I raise this? I really have fear for the lives of people, you know, who engage in whistleblowing. I made that my point at that very early. So a person making a disclosure will definitely want to ensure that he or she is protected. So here we have the matter of confidentiality. The matter of confidentiality. And how confidential, although we talk about protected disclosure, how confidential really?
Member for Tabaki?
Yes.
Your original 30 minutes are now spent. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
You may proceed.
Thank you. So to ensure confidentiality and guard against retaliation, a whistleblower may feel more comfortable disclosing information anonymously. But under the current legislation, anonymous disclosures are not protected information. That's Section 10, Subclause 1 of the bill. And as this information is not protected, the person's identity could feasibly be deduced from the information. The Act, however, Attorney General said it, provides that if the identity of a person that makes an anonymous disclosure becomes known, the disclosure will then become protected. That's Section 10.4. But this is after the fact. This is after the fact. A person's identity and disclosure could long be discovered before any protective action is taken. Madam Speaker, anonymous disclosures also have a disadvantage. They could have the unintended consequence of generating false or vindictive allegations if the reporting person cannot be identified and held accountable. And therefore, I have a problem with anonymous things. If you have something to say, you should come forward and say it. This is why I talked about rare courage and commitment. So this matter of anonymous disclosures, anonymous reporting, I have a deep problem with it. You see, Madam Speaker, one of the things that is said in Section 7 of the bill when it talks about who's making the disclosure, they must have reasonable grounds. And then there's a lot of immunity granted about this matter of reasonable grounds and what have you. But Madam Speaker, you know, reasonable grounds could be based on rumors. Reasonable grounds could be based on fake news. And one of the distinguishing characteristics of this country is rumor mongering. Somehow we feed on rumors. We feed on rumors. Everything is a rumor. And rumor assumes a truth of its own and gets legs and voices and ears and eyes. So one has to be very, very careful about that. Madam Speaker, the whole matter of rumor mongering and people, you know, picking up a rumor, and this rumor becomes a disclosure, anonymous disclosure. And what would that, in fact, lead to? There's also the other matter of people making reports to save their skin, that they may have had some tiff. An employee has a tiff with the employer. He no longer works or she no longer works with the employer, and they want to take revenge. You know, all of these matters, you know, have to be carefully thought out. And this is why, at the end of the bill where the fines are proposed, the fines seem to be very low in terms of what is proposed. I tried to find in the bill what the Act states about the rights of an individual or the rights of a company subject to a whistleblowing complaint. Let's take a case of a company and simply ask the question, if a company is being accused of malpractice, what are their rights? What are their rights? Let's assume that the company cannot cross-examine the whistleblower. Because one of the things you see here is that the directors of the whistleblowing units, they have some rare powers. They can decide whether something goes on or something doesn't go on, or what have you, and so on. And therefore, one of my colleagues did raise, towards the end of his contribution, the member for Rapuch East, I think it is, the whole question of West, Dr. Munilal, of the directors and their powers and how these directors are to be appointed. And that's something that I think we need to look more deeply into. Now, companies, in the private sector, companies operate, let's face it, to further their own interests. And if each company is to institute its own whistleblowing report unit, what oversight is there to ensure that these units do not only exist on paper and is appropriately equipped and motivated to properly investigate disclosures? Who's going to train the people in these units? Are companies to train their own personnel? Are we going to have several different policies and processes, or are we going to have something that is consistent from organization to organization? How is this going to work? All the legislation talks about is have to set up these units, but how are they going, in fact, to work? Because you could end up with several different mechanisms, several different policies to handle disclosures across different companies. And now, the French courts have struck down internal whistleblowing procedures as invalid, as they were too broad in scope or could harm the vital interests of the company or physical or moral integrity of an individual employee. That happened in the French courts, to substantiate the point I'm making. So I believe that comprehensive training should be provided to streamline procedures, and an independent agency formed to provide advice and support and monitor and review internal whistleblowing report units. Now, you set up a whistleblowing report unit. Somebody walks in there to make a report. And somebody sees this person innocently walk into the WRU. They don't know if the person make a report or can't make a report. And that person can become unfairly targeted. And then the whole confidentiality is breached. And that's why I'm saying that disclosure should be encouraged not only through a company, but through regulatory authorities, specialized agencies, and what have you. Madam Speaker, my final point is the director's rule. The Act provides for external disclosure to the WRU within a designated authority. And this WRU is the only unit responsible for receiving and processing external disclosures. A single person in the person of the director of the WRU considers the appropriateness of the disclosure, whether it should be referred for further investigation or if the case should be handled internally. And those section 14, 3, 15, 2, and 3. Is there any oversight? Because I couldn't perceive it. Is there any oversight for the director's decisions? That's the question I'm putting. Is there any oversight for the director's decisions? Yes. There is. Okay, in the court. Madam Speaker, we all need, as I said, legislation to guide our behavior, to regulate conduct in the society and what have you. But Madam Speaker, I do have issues with how well this bill is understood by the private sector. I do have issues with that. And I think that it will not be foolhardy of me to ask of the Attorney General that maybe we need to do some more education so that people can become accurate with what this bill is all about. Let me state my case very clearly. I'm not against legislation that forges a higher morality. I'm not against that at all. I think my commitment to the common good suggests that you have to engage in some kind of man's law that regulates irrational behavior and greed. And Madam Speaker, with those few words, I thank you.
Member for Moruga Tableland.
Good afternoon, Madam Speaker. Good afternoon to members on both sides of the House. It's my pleasure to stand this afternoon to contribute to this bill with the very, very lengthy title that I'm very happy we can all summarize as the whistleblower legislation. Madam Speaker, I've listened with intent to every member that has spoken thus far, both on government side and also on the side of the opposition, with particular interest in what would be said by members opposing. I will ignore the contribution of the member for Oropouche East, and unfortunately I had a meeting, so I missed much of what the member for St. Augustine has to say, so I will not editorialize on that. I can, of course, refer to what was just said by my colleague from Tabakit. And I have to say that there are significant parts of his discussion that I appreciated. I appreciated his attempt to provide an ethical and moral grounding to his discussion. I think in the case of this legislation, such a thing was very useful. I appreciate his questioning of whether, as a society, we have abandoned the teaching of ethics to our young people. I will suggest to him that whereas in a modern education system there is no longer a subject called ethics, which would have existed previously, there is still an attempt to convey some of that learning through other curriculum areas, particularly social studies, for example. Whether it is something we need to look more coherently at is a longer discussion we perhaps can have. But there are attempts to convey that kind of ethical training to our students. I noted with keen interest, Madam Speaker, his critique of the level of disengagement amongst our citizenry in some of what we do in this Parliament, and I agree to some extent. If there is one caveat I would like to perhaps add, and it's always good to critique oneself before we critique others, I would agree that there is great disengagement to some extent in our society in terms of what governance is, how it functions, how it operates. And citizens have to bear the responsibility for much of that. But what I will say as a parliamentarian, sometimes by the way we debate, operate, what we do may be a bit obscure for the person that we sometimes call the typical man or woman to follow. And it is not that I am suggesting that our population is undereducated or foolish or lacks acumen. If we debate an act and we go through that process, which we need to go through, of looking at each clause and looking at the semantics, looking at the diction, oftentimes citizens will get lost and disenchanted. So what I might suggest is that in the same way that the member, Madam Speaker, could come and provide some philosophical underpinning, that there must be room within these debates for different kinds of discourses that citizens can and will choose to follow. And I will leave it right there. Where I take, or I have some significant disagreement with the member, is with the notion, which he did not state overtly, I will say that up front, that somehow there should be some delay in the passing of this legislation. That is where I have great disagreement. And I hearken back to what the Prime Minister, the member for Diego Martin West, said when he was speaking, that there is never, ever, ever going to be a perfect legislation, but there is great harm to be caused in constantly waiting, constantly delaying, always looking to tweak every single thing, and you end up doing nothing. As a government, we provided a commitment, we gave a commitment to this nation that we would look seriously at corruption, I will be the first to admit, as I am sure the Attorney General will, that no bill that he brings here is ever going to be perfect, but we cannot let the perfect kill the necessary. So, whereas this law can be amended, discussed, changed, transformed, we must do something. Madam Speaker, it may have slipped past us, but there is a very rare, I've never seen it in 3 years plus, there's a very rare consensus in the Parliament this afternoon on both sides that we have a problem. I think everybody in the chamber understands that we are dealing with issues here that none of us can elide, we cannot obviate. We have a problem in this nation. And the problem can be summarized as corruption. What many don't understand is the source of that problem. And we use that misunderstanding to denigrate ourselves. And I would suggest if there's one thing that we do as part of this process, it's understanding that we are not uniquely corrupt, we are not uniquely condign, we are not uniquely benighted as a nation, that there are reasons why we find ourselves in this kind of quagmire. Madam Speaker, I was reading something yesterday on social media, and it still amazes me to see these things, but it gives a good indication of where our mindset lies. There is, throughout this nation, a great concern with the question and specter of corruption that pervades all levels of the society. So whereas I could argue on one side that we have a culture of corruption here that we have not dealt with in as significant a manner as we should have, there is a tide of feeling that this thing is a problem and we have to do something about it. I saw one commentator, not particularly talking about this act, but talking about the whole issue, the question of corruption, saying that if she had to vote in the future, she would vote for the Queen. Because no one here can solve this problem. And that really points to a total misapprehension, misunderstanding of where this problem really lies. And I was really happy to sit here and to hear the Prime Minister, when he spoke, make a passing reference to the Red House. Because I could use that as a very simple anecdote to explain this in a way that would be understood by anybody or everybody. Madam Speaker, I don't get excited very often. But I am actually excited about the idea of standing in the Red House. As someone who has been concerned with government and governance, maybe all of my life, as early as I could understand the word or the term, the Red House has tremendous symbolic, cultural, and real meaning for me. Standing there is something I look forward to as a parliamentarian. So much so, Madam Speaker, every day I come to work, before I start what I have to do, I stand by the window and I look at the Red House being fixed. And I am proud to be part of a government.
Member for Maruga, Tableland, I really think you should now bring your contribution into what we're discussing today, please.
Madam Speaker, I am. I know the member for Kuvanor gets confused very easily, so I'm not insulted. Madam Speaker, we're talking about corruption. We are talking about changing a culture of corruption. We are talking about using the powers of the Parliament, which is statutory obligations, to convert a culture. I'm going back to where it started. Madam Speaker, I've been watching that roof, I'm sure it's very expensive. Go onto that building. And I'm not sure how many people know, but I know. What I'm actually looking at is the 4th roof of the Red House going on. Now, you ask yourself how? You ask yourself why? The first Red House was burned down in 1903. It was rebuilt in 1907. Logically, this should be the 3rd roof going on. It's actually the 4th roof, Madam Speaker. Why? Because the first roof of the Red House, Madam Speaker, was awarded to the friend of a friend of a friend of the right person. And that person had no expertise in architecture, in construction, and they designed a very beautiful and very ornate roof on the first building in the 1840s. And that roof was so heavy, it had to be removed. And Madam Speaker, that's the point. Those who believe this culture of corruption is something that is innately us. It is a post-independence thing. It is a failure of our people. Don't understand that that history and that culture of corruption that was integral to colonialism is where this thing started. And Madam Speaker, no parliamentarian, no parliament that doesn't understand the source of something or the reason for something can hope to solve this something. So I am sure of one thing, Madam Speaker, this afternoon, Couva North has learned something. And that doesn't happen very often. And you are welcome, my colleague. And Madam Speaker, that's where it comes from. That's where it comes from. That's why we have a history and a culture of corruption, Madam Speaker. And that's why it pervades every level of this society. And if we don't understand that, Madam Speaker, we don't understand how deeply it has been forced into our DNA, there is no chance of us ever solving it. Madam Speaker, the preamble to this act says very clearly, this act shall have effect even though inconsistent with sections 4 and 5 of the Constitution. And that might seem a very trite and very slight statement, but it's very profound. It's very significant. Madam Speaker, every single member of Parliament in this chamber swore on some book of their choice to do one thing, uphold the Constitution, and to do right without fear or favor. Madam Speaker, I am very sure, I am very certain that the Attorney General is a great respecter of the Constitution. He swore the same oath I swore. And I'm sure he's a very great respecter of the Constitution. But he is bringing to the Parliament an act that contravenes significant sections of the Constitution. And that is not something that an Attorney General will do slightly. Any Attorney General, especially one of this caliber, would do slightly. And it's only going to happen, Madam Speaker, it's only happening because we have no choice. We have come to the point in our history and development as a nation where we understand, Madam Speaker, if we continue as we are going, if we keep doing things as we are doing, if we remain, Madam Speaker, as we were commonly known under the tenure of the previous regime as an eat-a-food people, if we continue as a you pull the string for me people, Madam Speaker, this nation has no future that is assured. Because that history and that culture of corruption tied to a rising tide of criminality, because they are intertwined. They are not discrete and distinct as we would like to convince ourselves that they are, will drown all of us. So what do we do, Madam Speaker? We could talk about this act as a discrete act, and we could talk about this statute and this stricture and this rule and that rule, and we could go down that legalistic tone, that legalistic slant. But Madam Speaker, what we need to understand here is that we are not in the business of passing an act today. We are in the business of trying to change our culture. And the normal response to that is to say that one of the most difficult things to be done, or that can be done, is to try to attempt to change our culture. But Madam Speaker, we have done that before in this nation. And the situation in the situation on this instance is far more dire. Madam Speaker, I never used to wear a seatbelt. I was one of those cavalier people. I will pay the $200. Let the police stop me. You put the right fine at the right time with the right pocket. Madam Speaker, I now wear my seatbelt all the time. It is possible to change our culture. All it takes is the right structure, the right intervention. And Madam Speaker, I will say that the Attorney General and this government has been putting those things in place, not just today, but for much of this session. You could look at this act in an isolated way, but if you look at the whole sweep of the legislation that the Attorney General has been bringing to the Parliament, there is a trend here. We have been doing two things simultaneously. One, attempting to lessen the burden on the courts so that justice can prevail, and on the other hand, trying to deal with this bogey called corruption. And Madam Speaker, as someone who is both a minister and an MP, I can say to you that this thing is real and that it is definitive. Madam Speaker, I'm sure every single member of Parliament here, regardless of how you may feel about each other or yourself, has come at some point face to face with this. And sometimes it comes in an innocuous form. Madam Speaker, I had one constituent come to me. She has a problem in terms of her house. There is some slippage. That's normal in my constituency. Much of the land is prone to slippage. She wants the problem solved. She understands that the member of Parliament is the person that can make this happen. But she comes to me and she says, if you do this for me, I will pay you X amount of money. Now I understand that. I understand that on a number of levels. Madam Speaker, that says to me a number of things. It says to me that that is the norm, that is the expectation. She may have tried to reach out to somebody before and failed. Or succeeded.
How long you would have
Or, Madam Speaker, it points to something more frightening. Now, Perima, you need some learning too. Madam Speaker, yes, I apologize. It might point to something which is far more dangerous, which is a loss of faith or a lack of faith that the system can work for you. And when, as a society, we reach the point where the typical citizen has reached that point, the only end result of that is chaos. I took the time to explain to her that my job is to assist her regardless of whatever circumstance, and that she really ought not to be offering any kind of inducement to me, and the matter ended there, and the problem was solved. Madam Speaker, unfortunately, there are other circumstances when it is far more sinister. I had another constituent come to visit me, embroiled in a land issue with his neighbor. Says to me, he will give me an inducement if I assist him in getting the land. And then he hits me this kind of sweet eye, wink, 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 wink. And I just look at him, Madam Speaker. So he keeps winking. And I just keep looking, and I said, partner, you can stop winking, you know. That sweet eye doesn't work with me.
carry some magazine.
Yeah. Something like that.
You get 900,000.
And I solved that problem a different way, Madam Speaker. But those are trite cases. There is one I'm facing right now that is of a more fundamental nature, and it will really take me where I want to go. Madam Speaker, it has become a thing in this country that whether by accident or by nature or by experience, some of us have accepted a certain level of crime and criminality as normal. Madam Speaker, there are people who believe that it is more cost-effective and much easier to work with or make peace with certain criminal elements in the community. I'll give you a very specific example. We are in the midst now of expending this year $70 million as part of a longer-term upgrade to the Muruga Road. And despite one or two concerns, it has gone fairly well. But there is a circumstance where we have what I would call some petty gangsters in the community. Yeah, I'm aware. Some petty gangsters in the community. I will not talk about affiliation or who utilized them before because it's not germane to the discussion. What they have done, Madam Speaker, is that they systematically gone to every single contractor working on the project, whether they are involved in the actual roadworks, whether they are doing mundane jobs like a box drain, whether they are doing the landslip walls, they've targeted every single contractor, particularly those who are not from the community. Now, Madam Speaker, they started this a few years ago, and it was like a game of chess. They would make a move and I would counter, because law enforcement is there to deal with them. My colleague from Point Fortin, the former Minister of National Security, was integral to me checkmating them in the earlier incarnation of their scheme. By some, transformation, some sleight of brilliance, they have actually found a way to meet these contractors before they arrive on site. What they would do is that the contractors would mobilize, and you're familiar with this, and they would go and intimidate.
Madam Speaker, 48.1, please. I'm trying to understand the relevance of this act that the minister is talking about, the whistleblowing legislation, please.
Minister, member, I'll give you some leeway. Please continue.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Point appears that Kuvanot problem too. Madam Speaker, they found a way to target them before they mobilized, so that by the time the contractor is on site, they're on site as well. And other ancillary criminal activities. And the point is this, member for Pointe-à-Pierre, and the point is this, Kuvanot, which will be lost on you, I know. Madam Speaker, the point is this. Every year, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, the state, expends significant amounts of funding, regardless of party involved, to try to develop this nation, to try to take us a step further, to improve the infrastructure for our citizens, to improve the quality of life for citizens. And you have to ask yourself, as a minister, as an MP, as a parliamentarian, how much of the money we spend actually hits the ground to affect the lives of our citizens. And that's the point. Madam Speaker, we have tried with law enforcement to once again counter this threat. But they have so intimidated all of the contractors and all of the workers that people are afraid to step forward or stand forward and say that I am being extorted, I am being threatened, my equipment is being damaged if I don't acquiesce to this criminality. The entire act. The entire act. No, I am not going to answer the member for Pointe-à-Pierre in a very minimalist way. The entire act. Because if someone, the entire bill, the entire bill. Madam Speaker, we have people who are looking at their future being leveraged, their future being stolen.
The crosstalk is now becoming intolerable. Member for Couva North, I know you haven't spoken as yet, but as soon as you catch my eye, you'll be given that opportunity.
Hopefully she'll
Continue,
speak.
member from Muruga, Tewarie.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have people who have waited for a long time for specific improvements, that are seeing the investment of the state being partly stolen in front of their eyes. And they are so intimidated that they are afraid to stand forward and say something. Madam Speaker, without that kind of intervention, this activity or this kind of activity which is happening in my constituency and is happening in other constituencies will continue. So, Madam Speaker, as someone who's not a lawyer, but as someone who understands the legalese, but also someone who understands that if we keep presenting laws here in very arcane jargon that cannot be followed by the common person, then much of what we do will be lost, member for Couva North, but understands that the laws that we pass here have a fundamental impact on the lives of citizens, and that if they understood the kind of impact and how it might empower them, they might be so motivated to do the right thing for the benefit of all of us. I will stand and have this kind of dialogue, even if the member for Pointe-à-Pierre, as usual, is confused again. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have reached a point in our development as a nation where we're going through a watershed piece of our history, watershed part of our history. At the end of it, we will be fundamentally changed. We used to be the kind of nation, Madam Speaker, that had the kind of economic prowess where we could convince ourselves that we could wink, wink, shrug shoulders, turn away from the corruption that was endemic throughout our public service and private sector. We are no longer that kind of country. Madam Speaker, if it used to be that we spent $1 and we got 10 cents purchase from it, we have to become the kind of nation that spends $1 and gets $1.50 from it. That's our new reality. That must be your imperative. And Madam Speaker, when the member for Tabaki talked about education and that we would need a greater education guide, he probably talked about it in a narrow sense in terms of schooling. But for this to really function, we need two things. We need to ensure that all of the acts we pass that are dealing with corruption or that can deal with corruption are implemented as they should be. And we need to understand, Madam Speaker, that if the population does not feel invested in it, that it will have no meaning, it will not have the kind of impact that it could have. Madam Speaker, the Prime Minister spoke today in a very aspirational way. And that's important. It's important to have a Prime Minister who aspires for the nation. We should all be speaking here in a very aspirational way. We all agree at this point that this society is plagued with corruption. We all agree that we should do something. Madam Speaker, there is no time like the present. I stand in support of this act. I stand in support of the Attorney General. I stand in support of this concerted effort to try to eradicate corruption in this country or to try to check the spread of corruption. I am a firm believer that if we do the hard work that always comes after the act, not just before, not just during the passage, the hard work that comes after, the implementation, the supervision, the police doing their job as is mandated to them, that we can start to turn this tide back. Madam Speaker, if we just give lip service to this, if we just don't do the hard work that is required, this nation will have no serious future that is worth having. The corruption will continue, the criminality will expand, and this will become a nation that none of us want to live in. If we as parliamentarians do our job, which is not just to debate and enact the right laws, but also to ensure that they're enforced, we have hope and we have a future. Our children might live in a better Trinidad than the one we are living in now. And that is worth standing and speaking about. Madam Speaker, I thank you.
Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I want to, first of all, respond
For Caroni Central. And it's after lunch. I'm reminding everybody of Standing Order 53. Those who want to make interruptions can rely on the relevant standing order. Member for Caroni Central.
Thank you, ma'am. I'll engage some of the issues that the member raised in a congenial way, really, as I stand to make a few points. I don't think I will take my full time on this act to combat corruption and other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector, to protect persons making these disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving investigating or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct and to provide for the other matters connected with. The member raised Murugat Tableland, the issue of citizens' engagement, Madam Speaker. And I think perhaps the biggest issue of citizen disengagement with the governance process is the dissonance that the citizen feels between what politicians and those in leadership positions say and what they do. And I think we should reflect on that for a moment. It is very real, that dissonance between talk and walk. The member said that it is possible to change a culture, and I do believe with him. I believe what he said to be true. It is possible to change a culture. And I do agree with him also that you can have laws or rules that help to change a culture, just like you can have the introduction of technology that helps to transform or change a culture. I do believe that that is true. But in order to do that, the dissonance between talk and walk must also be arrested. It helps. So the laws support at one level, the technology supports at another level, and the example becomes critical in this process. He said something else that I thought was important. He talked about the culture of corruption and the rising tide of criminality, and that they were connected. I also believe that that is true. Because there is a direct connection, and sometimes many indirect connections between white-collar crime and the crime on the ground. He mentioned I'm not sure if he said the sweep of legislation. I thought you said that. Huh? Suite. The suite of legislation. And I did have this. I've been looking at this for like 3 or 4 months now, the legislation that was promised, the legislation we brought to Parliament. And there are 2 things that I find about the legislation to be extremely strong. It is not limited to this because there might be aberrations. But in general, I find, one, a lot of the legislation is prompted by international demands that require legislative action at home. And the second thing is that a lot of the legislation increases governmental power in the country. And I think if you look at those 2 elements, I mean, you really question the whole motivation behind the local governance process. Not that responding to international promptings is not necessary. I am not so sure that the increasing power of government is justified. But I want to record that when you look at the suite of legislations, or maybe this word sweep is a good word, in fact, you find these dominant traits in the legislation. Now, when the Honorable Prime Minister spoke, and he spoke well, he's a good speaker, both on the platform and in the Parliament. And he is always a clear speaker in his methodology and his message, you know. But he talked about an act of urgency, the legislation not being an act of urgency to deal with any specific matter. And he said it was a campaign commitment to bring the whistleblower legislation. And it took them 4 years, but they brought it. He said that they had put it forward before in 2016. It had gone through Joint Select Committee process. I do agree with my colleague from Oropouche East that the Attorney General, as chair, should have proceeded to complete that process and let it come here with the reports. But having said that, you know, there are many, many other promises that they might have brought also, not just to the Parliament, but to the country. There was one point that he made, though, and I think the Attorney General made a similar point in his presentation, which is that because the private sector is so connected to public money, because of the largeness of government and the extent to which they are connected or dependent on public expenditure, government expenditure, that it was necessary to bring one piece of legislation that legislated for both the public and the private sector. And this is where I begin to have a problem. While I take the issue of public money, while I take the issue of the connection between public and private sector in its exposure and engagement of public money, if that becomes a rationale for basically strengthening the power of government over not just the process involving the public sector, but the process involving the private sector, it can turn out to be a problematic issue in a society such as this that is so connected. The Honorable Prime Minister also said that we must not be afraid to do our duty and that we have nothing to fear. And I want to say, Madam Speaker, we have always, as an opposition, done our duty in this Parliament. Sometimes the government likes it, sometimes they do not like it, but always we do what we feel is right for the legislation and for the moment. The moment being not just a political moment, but the connection of the legislation to things that are happening in the society. So we do not do anything out of fear here. When we don't like something, we ask for it to go to the Joint Select Committee. When it comes here, if we have to make amendments, we do it, as we did with the Wealth Bill. And we play the role of the opposition, which is to critically support. If we like something, we support it. If we don't like something, we don't support it, and we say we don't like it, why we don't like it. And when we have a situation where a compromise is possible, we also signal that. But the Prime Minister talked about corruption in the society generally. He didn't use the word plenty, but he did talk about.
To make an interruption?
Yes, I was asking my friend Central if you would give way, Madam Speaker.
All right.
No, I do not wish to give way, Madam Speaker.
Continue.
Just wanted to
Carney
make it
Central.
like this.
And that puts it. Continue, Carney Central.
Yes, he said that there was corruption in the society, and we agree. There is corruption in Trinidad and Tobago, as there is in almost every society. But we do not agree with the position of the members for St. Joseph that this is a corrupt society from top to bottom. We do not believe that everybody in this society is corrupt.
Correct.
We believe that there is corruption. We believe that there are corrupt people. We believe that corrupt acts take place. We believe that some people yield to temptation more than others. But we also believe that there are honest people in this country, plenty of them, that they want good government and good governance. And we feel that at the end, people in Trinidad and Tobago, I mean, by and large, they want to have a good government that governs well, and by that they mean fairly. They want a system that allows due respect for the citizen so that they can go about the building of their lives and the management of a life which prepares them for their children's next generation benefits. And they also want to have a place, which is where this whistleblowing legislation comes into play, where if something is going wrong and the institutions are not working, they are not functioning, they want to have an opportunity, or they want to know that they have a safe place where they can get something done, so that something will be done about it. And part of the frustration of the population is that they see things happening all around, and they are not seeing any responses, they are not seeing any consequences, and therefore they get upset. But in doing a piece of legislation such as this, we have to ask ourselves some questions. And these were raised by some of the speakers before, both on our side and on the government side. And that issue is, what kind of societal culture do you need, Madam Speaker, to support whistleblowing legislation as a contribution to public good? Because we have to understand that that is the intention of this piece of legislation, although it doesn't say so. The idea is to create the conditions in which an individual citizen feeling moved to do so can make a contribution to the public good. And at the end of the day, the purpose of it is good governance. And some people talked about the breakdown of ethics in the private sector. I think it was my colleague from Tabaki who talked about that. And we all know that one of the issues in governance and in government everywhere, including Trinidad and Tobago, but also elsewhere, is the business of corruption in the public apparatus of the state. So the issue is what is the culture that you need for that? And it is becoming even more fierce because we know from 2008 there has been a kind of collapse of the ethical foundations of the whole capitalist order. That is one thing. And we certainly know that what is happening everywhere is that constitutions are being tested, whether it's by our neighbor in Venezuela or whether it is in the epitome of so-called democracies in this hemisphere, which is the United States of America. So there is constitutional testing at the political level, and we have had the collapse of the ethical foundations within the private sector made very, very clear in 2008, 2009. So it's a problem. So we are trying to build this legislation and to present this legislation now in this kind of climate where we are also affected, because we were affected, Madam Speaker, by the 2008-2009 crisis here in the matter of the big insurance company called Clico and others that were affected during that period. But we are also affected by issues. So for instance, in our time when we were in government, we did the procurement legislation. It took us a little while to get it to the parliament, but we passed that legislation, and it was precisely, people need to remember that there might have been 10 or 12 years that had passed with that legislation trying to make it to birth. And it was the People's Partnership that nursed that process in order to create the conditions for the passage of that legislation. So you need a certain culture in order to do it. What type of institutional system is necessary? Now, we know that there are realities if you go to work in a certain place. For instance, if you be in a cabinet of a country, there is such a thing as confidentiality of cabinet and collective responsibility. If you are in the public service, you know that there are certain things which require you to be confidential about as part of the public service operations. If you work in a private sector institution, depending on the level that you are, you might be asked to even sign something which says confidentiality, secrecy, etc. And therefore, if you have this element present in your society, whether in the public or private sector, and you have legislation like this, you immediately have a conflict of intention and a conflict of interest, and you put an employee or a potential whistleblower in a position where at some point in time they have to choose. And the protection offered by the legislation, I want to say, my problem with the legislation is that I am not sure that it offers enough protection to the whistleblower. And at the same time, it has the propensity to create the conditions for a massive news-making society, a news-carrying society. It is that extremity which you need to contain, which I think is absent or missing in the bill, and I think not thoughtfully rendered, all right, in the, what you call it, the composition of the bill, Madam Speaker. Now, what objective is support for whistleblowing meant to serve? I mentioned the issue of the public good, and this is important. And one of the questions that arises is public good superior to individual rights and individual freedoms? That's a hard question. That is a real hard question. One has to do with the heart of constitutional and human rights questions in most societies, and the other one has to do with a philosophical view of how you build a civilization. These things have been written about for centuries, Madam Speaker. And that's a very hard question. I want to say something. The Japanese have a whistleblower legislation that they passed in 2004. And you know how they describe the objective of that legislation? I read just a little part of it. The purpose of this legislation is to contribute to the stabilization and general welfare of the life of every citizen. It is the same thing, to do with whistleblowing. And it is strong in this legislation about people having the right to do the right thing when something is wrong. But their conception of what this thing is meant to be is far, in my view, Madam Speaker, and I'm sure in yours, significantly superior in vision, in sensibility, in a sense of ethos about the society itself. And I think that those are the elements of the bill, I think, that trouble me. Another issue that it raises, therefore, in that context, is what level and dimension of citizenship does it require for responsible practice of whistleblowing? Because I said two of the issues was it doesn't protect the whistleblower well enough, but the second issue is that it can create the condition in which everybody is news carrying about everybody. And you can have a problem. What is the level of citizenship responsibility that you need, and how do you cultivate that? How do you help that? And I want to start with the original issue that I raised, drawing on what my friend from Maruga Tableland said, which is that dissonance between what you say and what you do, the leadership by example question, being critical in this regard, because citizenship behavior is a response to either the evolving nature of leadership by example at the top, or deteriorating nature of leadership by example at the top. That is what characterizes citizenship behavior. So, one of the early points I made was that I had a problem with state jurisdiction over private sector industries. And I do have a problem with that, Madam Speaker. Because you see, the state is larger and the state owns a significant proportion of the industries in this country. Perhaps getting a little smaller now, I don't know, because as industries are divested, you are also creating more state enterprises. So it may well be growing. But if you bring whistleblowing having to do with private sector institutions under the control of the 21 government agencies identified here, Madam Speaker, I think you are drawing the private sector into a domain. I don't know if they would wish to go there. And secondly, I don't know what the implications are for government exercise of control over those private institutions. Because you see, many of the institutions we create are meant to be independent in name, Madam Speaker, and to be also independent in reality. But the temptation is such, because of the political process and constitutional power in our country, that many of those institutions which are meant to be independent can be politicized by the process of appointments and by other things. That then creates a situation in your society where bringing the private sector under this ambit now can create a double jeopardy problem. And I want to warn against it. I don't think it's healthy for our society. I am against this kind of state expansion of control in any society. But in a little country like Trinidad and Tobago, 1.4 million, maybe more now with the migration and so on, and will increase. But it's still a small society. As bad as things might be, or seem to us sometimes, we still manage to govern pretty well. There is still a fear. There is, yes, a lot of interdependence, but there is a fear, sectoral sense of independence between government on the one hand, private sector on the other. And we've had a creeping situation here, Madam Speaker, which we need to acknowledge. We had legislation that we passed here that brought the entire NGO sector under state control. A governance system which allows for effective individual scrutiny of every civil society institution in the society. I am not against the scrutiny. I am against a situation in which government, being a principal funder of many of these civil society institutions, now have really executive power over many of these institutions on the basis of demand for certain accountability. So that's that. So you bring your NGO. How is a society organized by and large? You have your mass of citizens, but you have government. You have the private sector involved in various business at different levels. You have your civil society sector. And you have the public sector serving under the governance arrangement of the government in power. Now, when you bring more and more institutions, more and more sectors of society under governmental scrutiny of this type, you're really creating a society that you do not want, Madam Speaker. I mean, today, you might be the government, today somebody else might be the government. But one day, some crazy person might be in government. And, Madam Speaker, it has happened in countries that never expected that that would happen to them. And if that's why you have to make laws which recognize certain restraints, which recognize the limits of reach, which recognize the curbs that you need to have inherently on power within the society of those least able to manage it. And therefore, I want to say, Madam Speaker, that this is a matter that I'm concerned about. I really do not feel You know, if BP wants to organize its own entity to manage whistleblowing, fine, I have no problem with that. If a state enterprise wants to have its own entity to manage whistleblowing, I have no problem with that. If Ansa Makal wants to have its own whistleblowing authority, but to have all the private sector institutions also contained in a situation where these individual institutions, a person can write to these institutions and bring them under government scrutiny by whatever process. You may argue that it's independent institutions or they're arm's length or whatever. Now, there are some that are justified, like the SEC issue. There are yet others that you can justify. But my own feeling is that you have to be very cautious about what you justify and how much you bring into it. I have a document here which I just want to share a few lines from, which is, it's taken from an article. I don't have the whole article. I pull out what I needed. Combating Corruption, the Development of Whistleblowing Laws in the United States, Europe, and Armenia, by David Schultz and Kachik Harutyunyan. It's a difficult name, and it was published in 2015. It says here that the first issue is that whistleblowing must have a strong moral, constitutional foundation in a given society. Okay? It asks for that. I asked the question, what are the conditions which allow you to do that? The second thing is that first, whistleblowers should act based only out of respect and honor of fellow citizens and not because of selfish motives, such as revenge or the elimination of a candidate for career growth. And second, the media and authorities must act together to portray good whistleblowers as heroes. We have a history in this country, my colleague here talked about it, in which a whistleblower came to a very bad end. And we have instances of recent whistleblowers who have been demonized in the public space. And the culture is not here. Look at the combative culture sometimes in the parliament, Madam Speaker. With all due respect for you, it's not you. It's the fact of partisan political behavior in the parliament. And many times you know that I have raised this issue, that if you have a very confrontational stand in the parliament, it makes it very difficult to find consensus on certain things. We go on here. They talk about legislative and institutional measures. I raised the issue of institution. The leadership of this new body, that's to say, if you are creating an institution to deal with this business of whistleblowing, the leadership of this new body should be appointed/elected by the legislature. You know why? Because they want multi-partisan scrutiny. Must be appointed, elected by the legislature, and through a super transparent, inclusive, and cross-society participation procedure in order to gain public trust. And the leadership of the body should enjoy immunity for the whole period of service, and removal from office should be possible.
Member for Caroni Central, the original time is now expired. You're entitled to 15 more minutes to complete your presentation.
I'd be grateful.
You may proceed.
Ma'am, in all truth, I did not even think I would speak for half an hour. But I will make a few points and complete. The leadership of this body should enjoy immunity for the whole period of service, and removal from office should be possible only by a parliamentary decision. You know why? Because you want to protect the people who have the responsibility of protecting whistleblowers. Think of their authority. They have to protect these whistleblowers. So the best way how to deal with a whistleblower, all right, if you have a problem with a whistleblower and you have criminal intent and criminal capacity for power, is to get to one of the people in charge of that, as they have done in other countries in which they have gotten to judges in the system. I mean, we're dealing with the real world here, Madam Speaker. So, I think that is something that if we take this seriously, and I think I had something here on Nigeria too, you know. Now, Nigeria, as you know, is a country in which corruption does exist, just like here. But they tried to do certain things. They talk about the structure. A structure built on technology is the best bet for a safer system of protection. For instance, the policy should provide for protective measures to be employed in data transfer, should consider the possibility of and present interception and hacking of the ministry's computer system, should consider anonymization of data and the desirable of a third-party repository for data. Okay, so they're talking about the protection process. Now, take our bill. What does this bill here have? The minister is the person to whom the entities report. And if I'm correct, in this bill is the Minister of National Security.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, given the wisdom of other people who have executed this in practice, and the derivatives they are now taking from seeing it work, this is not by interested parties. These are by academics who are looking at the system to see whether it's working, and how it works best. Shouldn't we take a little caution and get this out of political hands and not have the private sector with government and ministers in charge? And it's a society we're building. It's a civilization we want to build. You know, so, Madam Speaker, I've raised some of the issues I want to raise, and I have only one more that I want to raise. This bill does not deal with the question of journalism. And I want to know what is the position of a journalist to whom a whistleblower comes and gives information, and that journalist then publishes the article in the public domain. Because I want a clear answer to that question. So the question I am asking is whether a journalist in such a situation is protected, whether the whistleblower is protected. Now, I know that there are laws and rules that protect sources in journalism. Had that not been possible, Nixon would have seen his full term. But it is an issue that remains there. You see, because one of the countries on which we claim we modeled this legislation was Malta. And I don't know, Madam Speaker, if members on the other side are aware of a name called Daphne Caruana Galicia. And that woman, who was a journalist, fairly young, who wrote about government corruption, nepotism, patronage, allegations of money laundering. One day she came home in the evening she came from work in the evening to go to her apartment. And what happened was that her entire car blew up with her in it, and she was gone. Up to now, I think they jailed 3 people. I think they have 3 people for trial. I don't know what is going to happen in that particular instance. But I think since we are using models from countries in which that could happen, And she was a prolific journalist who did it on many occasions. I think this is something that we should worry about and be concerned about. And one of the countries that we modeled it on, they say, is Malaysia. Malaysia is a country, you know, Anwar Ibrahim used to be Minister of Finance. He came here in Trinidad. I was minister at the time in the NAR government. And he came here and he had very high hopes for aspirations of his country and so on. He fell out with the Prime Minister Mahathir. He became leader of the opposition. They jailed him. God knows what they did with him in jail. And then he eventually came out, and because of problems in the society, including corruption by the government, which won the elections and eliminated all of them from government, the former Prime Minister and him got together. He is now back in government again. But that is a country in which one of the charges that he was making was the issue of corruption. And he ended up in jail for being an accuser of government corruption. So I'm saying that when we make the legislation and we draw the models, we must also understand the history and the context, Madam Speaker. Because not everything that glitters is gold. And we have to be careful about what we are doing. And as I say, this legislation covers broad terrain which neither protects the whistleblower fully and can create the conditions in which you have a nation of tattlers, basically, you know, screaming corruption of other people. And Lord knows, depending on the direction of any particular government at the time and the ethos of that time, how that can emerge in your society. And there's one final thing that I want to say, and this is important, which is that the member for St. Augustine raised the issue of the problem of witness protection. I don't want to belabor the point, but it's a reality. People have been executed for being a witness before they go to trial, before they go to testify in a trial. So that is an issue of concern. And this thing does not guarantee any such protection. You know that. This guarantees really protection from litigation, protection from being fired, protection from, you know, demotion, you know, things like that. But there's a more sinister element depending on the level of corruption. And we talk every day, all the legislation that has been brought here, what it is: terrorism, crime, money laundering, drugs. The Prime Minister this morning raised the issue of gambling, big money, he said, and big malfeasance, which is recorded nowhere in the public documents for 2016, 17, or 18, he read from the documents. All of these things. Imagine you are a whistleblower in this situation in which so much money is involved. Who in the government or in this nation, Madam Speaker, is going to protect you from physical harm in this country? I mean, we have to give some thought to this thing. Legislation is not a joke to just come here and say, listen, opposition, join hands with us and pass. This is a serious, serious matter. You have to put institutions in place, structures in place. You have to have systems in place. You have to get your institutions all right. Madam Speaker, I do not want to go where you prevented one of my colleagues from coming, but there are three principal institutions that affect us here. And one of them now, at the highest level, is in a situation of uncertainty. Okay? I mean, the executive of this country at any given point in time is always under pressure. You know that, besides that one. And then parliamentarians, we talk already about the issue of governance and the alienation of people from the governance process. And we know that many of the institutions do not work. Look at the testimony of one of the prosecutors before a joint select committee the other day, talking about how she, as a prosecutor out of the DPP's office, what she has to face every day. If she has to do that, what is the position of magistrates? What is the position of judges? What is the position of other officers executing the law making and the law execution process? It is a problematic issue, Madam Speaker. And my own feeling is that this bill is really quite deficient to the time, the context, the stage at which we are in the society, and does not take into account the really problematic area of the intertwining of money laundering, gambling, crime, the drugs, all of these things. And I think that this takes a view of a society that you can timidly rein in and get to change its behavior when the attendant conditions all around us tell us that, look, we are dealing with a fierce reality that needs something much more substantial than this in order to stand the test of time. So I thank you very much for the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for giving me the opportunity to speak in this debate. And a bill entitled An Act to Combat Corruption and Other Wrongdoing by Encouraging and Facilitating Disclosures of Improper Conduct in the Public and Private Sector, to protect persons making these disclosures from detrimental action, to regulate the receiving, investigating, or otherwise dealing with disclosures of improper conduct, and to provide for other matters connected herewith. Madam Speaker, when one looks at the bill and the title of the bill, there are some key issues that comes out, that jumps out at you, namely corruption, wrongdoing, encouraging disclosures of improper conduct, and of course both in the public and private sectors. But at the heart of it all, and before I even proceed, I want to certainly and truly thank the Attorney General for what he has brought to the House today, a bill with respect to what is commonly referred to as Whistleblowers Bill, that will, to my mind, could be a game changer in our system, insofar as dealing with crime and security. And the Attorney General has not disappointed, because he continues to bring legislation to this House, Madam Speaker. He continues to bring legislation that works in tandem with efforts being made in national security. And I certainly want to congratulate him again, once again. But Madam Speaker, really in treating with the bill before us today, it really speaks to the heart of it, and I think the Attorney General mentioned. It talks about the whole question of values. The whole question of where do we place our values as a society? Where do we place our values as a country? Where do we place our values as members of this august House here, both on the opposition side and the government side, Madam Speaker? It is really at the heart of our nation, the heart of our soul, insofar as values really is what tells us what is right or wrong, and it touches our heart really. What tells us what is right or wrong in any given situation, and how do we control the value system. Madam Speaker, I listened attentively to the member for Caroni Central. I just want to treat with some of the issues that he dealt with. He started off by speaking and talking about the member for Maruga Table and talking about dissonance in terms of walking the talk. And I want to put it quite squarely to him, that this government is one government that should walk the talk, Madam Speaker. We said that we're going to bring legislation to this House, and we have brought legislation, which is what we expected to do as parliamentarians, Madam Speaker. This is what we expected to do, bring the legislation to the House. What is the difference here is whether or not we get the support of the opposition when we bring the legislation to the House, Madam Speaker. You know, he also went on to talk about that he agreed that there are people, honest people in this country, who want good governance. But I dare say to him also that the same honest people in this country also want good opposition. They want a responsible opposition. They also want a responsible opposition who are there, who understand the very patriotic nature of this country, and so support and be able to support the bills that are brought here for the benefit of the greater good, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, he spoke about the whole question of protection, of protection of the whistleblower, and he said that there is no protection. But I think if we looked at the bill quite clearly, if we looked at the bill and you read the bill quite clearly, and one looks at page 14, part 3 of the bill, it talks about protection of whistleblowers. And there are, Madam Speaker, a list on adequate protection that's afforded to whistleblowers. Now, the bill is there. The bill is there, and a bill, as mentioned through the Attorney General, laws can always be amended, but they have to test the ground first of all. They have to be placed on the ground, have to be placed in the environment. And there are protection, but yet he said that there are no protection. Well, let me look at the bill, Madam Speaker. Let's draw us back to the bill. Part 3, protection of whistleblowers. And Part 3, Section 18 speaks to, subject to exception provided for in this Act, despite any prohibition of or restriction on the disclosure of information under any written law, rule of law, contract, oath, or practice, a whistleblower shall not be subjected to detrimental action on account of his having made a protected disclosure. I mean, that's protection being offered. And it goes on. Section 19 says to us, notwithstanding any other law, but subject to Section 21, a whistleblower who makes a protected disclosure is not liable on any criminal, civil, or disciplinary proceedings for having made such a disclosure. Whistleblower protection shall not be prejudiced on the basis that A, the whistleblower was in good faith mistaken about the importance of disclosure. B, any perceived threat to the public interest on which the disclosure was based has not materialized. Or C, whistleblower has not fully respected the procedural requirements of this Act, of any regulations or guidelines made on this Act. So there are, in fact, protections offered the whistleblower, Madam Speaker, yet he said there are no protection. I don't think if you read the bill and you understand that there are. And it's a starting point that the bill really speaks to. As I said, there can be amendments being made once the bill is tested on the ground, but there are protections offered the whistleblower. In some cases, if the whistleblower runs afoul of his own commitment, as mentioned, let's say in Section 3, in any criminal proceedings instituted against a whistleblower, based on the fact that a whistleblower was the perpetrator of or an accomplice in the improper conduct disclosed by the whistleblower, the court shall, in giving its judgment or decision, take into due account the fact that the disclosure was made by the whistleblower, and B, whether the whistleblower has assisted the police to apprehend any other person involved in the commission of offense, and the punishment of the whistleblower may be mitigated or remitted as the court thinks fit, and the court shall expressly refer to this subsection in its judgment. So there's a balancing act. There's a balancing act when you look at this section with respect to protection of whistleblowers, so that the member for Caroni Central must understand that there are, in fact, protection for the whistleblower in the bill, as stated, Madam Speaker. You said there were no protection for whistleblower. Well, all right. And, he went on again to talk about, Madam Speaker, he went on to talk about the witness protection, and he put on the record that people have been executed under the witness protection. I'm not so sure if the member really understands the justice protection system in Trinidad and Tobago. So to date, since the justice protection program has started, no one has been killed under the justice protection system. And I'm talking about the justice protection system where the witness be engaged based on the MOU signed between themselves and the Director of Public Prosecutions, and in that program. Now, there's a mistake that I hear it from time to time that's being made with the witness protection program. There are witnesses who, based on the police investigation, may take people into custody, protect them. That is not the justice protection witness system, Madam Speaker. It is not. The justice protection system is clearly based on investigation. The witness has sufficient evidence that the DPP feels that is enough for a conviction, and that person comes into a memorandum of understanding with the DPP, and there are certain things that they must comply with to join the justice protection system. That is the witness protection program that is running from more than 20 years now. And that is the one that no one has been executed on that program, Madam Speaker. None. So there mustn't be a confusion with those two kind of programs. So when we're speaking about it, I wanted to make it quite clear, as he said, that someone has been executed. So I want to put it on the record that that's not it. Madam Speaker, we are treating today with the whole question of this Whistleblowers Act, and so on. Madam Speaker, the fact is that today, corrupt practices and illegal activities generate rewards for a number of people in this society. We cannot put our head in the sand. There are a number of corrupt activities that take place in our society. When you look at the landscape right now, and there's a line that runs through almost everything in the security environment, whether we're dealing with guns, whether we're dealing with drugs, whether we're dealing with trafficking in persons, whether we're dealing with trafficking in illegal drugs and so on. There are corruptions. There's a line of corruption that goes through all those, Madam Speaker. So that corruption is endemic. Corruption is endemic at all levels of our society. We talk about white-collar crime, and I know that the member for St. Joseph spoke at length about white-collar crime. A white-collar crime, Madam Speaker, is really a non-violent crime. We might describe it as that. It is committed by someone, typically a person in business, government, or a profession, in the course of occupational activities, namely for financial gain. It can involve criminal activities committed by people in the regular course of their business, for example, fraud and embezzlement. Now, we have heard report, Madam Speaker, of contractors who claim that when they were given contracts, they know that they have to pay 10%, probably 20% of the value of the contract, the person who helped them to obtain contracts in the first place. And we have seen it. We have heard those stories. We have seen some efforts being made by this government to bring people to task for that. Madam Speaker, I can speak even in respect to my own ministry, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, where there are situations where we are doing some investigations right now. But there are even some history to that, because we do have instances where information comes to the heart of people who insist on gaining houses, for instance, illegally, by paying some people within the ministry and so on. And those information come to us, anonymous or otherwise, by the same kind of method that we're treating with today, through whistleblowers. So that when we talk about whistleblowers and so on, and what this bill is about to do, is relevant to almost all facets of the security environment we treat about it, almost throughout. And I don't think that whistleblowers is really a new phenomenon. No. This is something that's always been there. What this government is trying to do is to really legislate for it, Madam Speaker. We have always had whistleblowers. From time immemorial, we have always had whistleblowers. It exists in almost all domains where you have two people together, 2 or 3 people gather together, where they have groups assembled. There's always someone who can go outside the group and say something that's happening. It happens even within our home sometimes. So whistleblowers have always been there. What the government is trying to do is to legislate for that, to put it right. Put it right so that it can help our people, Trinidad and Tobago, to treat with the issues of crime and criminality, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, of course, in our fight against corruption, we have a number of legislation that ties into this. The bill that before us cannot, by itself, treat with all the issues that confront us. It certainly cannot. But we have seen the Attorney General bring a suite of legislation, and they have to look at it in a combined manner. They cannot be treated in isolation. So when we look at Integrity in Public Life Act, the Proceeds of Crime Act, the recent Civil Asset Recovery and Management and Unexplained Wealth Bill, the Foreign Tax Compliance Act, among others. So there are several legislation that we can look at, combined together, that will give us, as the government and those who have to implement the laws, the kind of ability, the capability to treat with the issues that we're trying to treat with. And this is not just the government, Madam Speaker. This is not a task for the government alone, but it's a task for all the members of this House. All 41 members of this House must be conscious of the fact that we are here to pass the legislation that's required to bring the kind of results for the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the time for the blind approach to governance is over. We cannot be blinded, and I dare say to the opposition, you have to be responsible. You have to understand that you have a role to play, and sometimes we have to stop opposing for opposing's sake. We have to stop opposing for opposing's sake and look at the greater good. We have to. I'm a very, we have to be able to stop opposing for opposing's sake. And look at what the bill is determined to do. Look at the greater good that the bill is determined to do. And so, I mean, when one look at the bill, there are no real issues of contention. We listen. We look and we listen. That's what we're all about. But when you look at the greater good, no one, I dare any one of us in this house, can say that this legislation is not useful in our current society today. I dare say anyone can say that. Because you look at it, it's not just in Trinidad and Tobago. Nah, he's a good man. It's not just in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look at Jamaica, and you look at what the purpose of the bill in Jamaica? To encourage and facilitate the making by employees of specified disclosure of improper conduct in the public interest. Note the word, Madam Speaker, in the public interest. In New Zealand, to promote the public interest, again the word, to promote the public interest by facilitating the disclosure and investigation of matters of serious wrongdoing in or by an organization, and by protecting employees who, in accordance with the Act, make disclosures of information about serious wrongdoing or by an organization. Again, you hear the word public interest. Canada has it as the public interest disclosure, in bracket, whistleblower protection. So they actually label it as the public interest disclosure. And it went on to say, to facilitate the disclosure and investigation of significant and serious matters in or relating to departments, public entities, offices, or prescribed service providers that an employee believe may be unlawful, dangerous to the public, or injurious to the public interest. Again, public interest. United Kingdom, and they name it also, Public Interest Disclosure Act. Again, the word public interest comes into view. Malaysia, to combat corruption and other wrongdoing by encouraging and facilitate disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector, to protect persons making those disclosures from detrimental action, to provide for the matters disclosed to be investigated and dealt with, and to provide for other related matters. In Malta, to provide procedures for employees in both private sector and the public administration, may disclose information regarding proper practices by the employees, by the employers or other employees in the employ of their employers, and to protect employees who make. What is common there, Madam Speaker? Public interest. You can see it running through the veins of all the jurisdictions, or most of the jurisdictions. The whole question of public interest. And hence the reason why I say, Madam Speaker, that this bill is not about us in this House. It is about the public interest, Madam Speaker. It's about the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And what we can do, Madam Speaker, it is about the public interest. And that is why we're here, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in a 2018 publication, Whistleblower Protection, a guide, the International Bar Association's Legal Policy and Research Unit and Legal Practice Division stated that organizations, be they government or private, rely on individuals, particularly employees, to bring to their attention information on actual or potential misconduct that may be occurring in the workplace. So that the need is there, Madam Speaker. And we talk about the public and the private sector. And there were some contentions whether we should deal into the private sector. Madam Speaker, the private sector is ahead of the game, you know. The private sector is ahead of the game. I came from private sector. I worked with Atlantic LNG for about 4 years, and I can tell you, within Atlantic LNG, there was a system in place for whistleblowers where you can actually make your pronouncement. If you have information, you send it anonymously, that is, to a designated individual who was in charge of that department, who received the information and treated it accordingly. And I know that it happens in other, especially in the oil companies and so on. So it's there. It happens in private organizations or other. It's already there, Madam Speaker. So it's not that we're trying to reinvent the wheel. As I always say, we're improving on the wheel, not reinventing the wheel, Madam Speaker. We're merely improving on the wheel. I know, Madam Speaker, when we look at whistleblowers, and it has been defined, quite frankly, it has been defined quite clearly. I think the definition has already been dealt with, so I will not go into it. It has been dealt with already. We know what we're talking about. But whistleblowers can reveal information that would otherwise go undetected and are therefore a vital source of human intelligence. Again, we talk about intelligence. We talk about intelligence giving you the kind of information, the kind of thing to treat with. So they can provide what is not normally brought to the fore. Such information can often be very critical to the organization. Ensuring it, among others, operates according to the law and an appropriate standard and protects the health and safety of its employees. Madam Speaker, this legislation also needs to be robust enough to withstand challenges. And I think if we go through the bill, we can see that there's a lot of robustness built into it to withstand challenges, which would be raised. After all, Madam Speaker, people do not like to see their income source dry up. We know that. Even if it is illegal gains, they will certainly raise challenges. If this occurs, some employees or members of the public can find themselves on the other side. So their legislation has to be robust, and I think the Attorney General went at length to ensure that the bill covers as much basis as it can. As I said, it cannot be a final. But I'm sure when you look at the bill, it has covered almost all the bases, or most of the bases that's required to protect the whistleblower, but to ensure that the disclosures are both protected and otherwise. One of the main obstacles in the fight against corruption, fraud, and mismanagement, Madam Speaker, is the inherently secret nature of such practices. The very inherent secret nature of those practices. Because again, especially with fraud and mismanagement, the perpetrators of those kind of crime go out of their way for secrecy, go out of their way to cover their tracks, Madam Speaker, especially when we talk about money and financial crimes and so on. And therefore, unless you have somebody inside, unless you have somebody who is close to the event or close to the perpetrator, it's very difficult to really solve those issues. And this is where whistleblower comes in. Because most of the time, a whistleblower is someone who has intimate knowledge of the events, has intimate knowledge that can stand up to the test of time, especially evidentially. And so it is important, Madam Speaker, without this kind of legislation, without the importance of whistleblowers, these kind of fraud and mismanagement will go unnoticed, undetected, and make our society even worse off, Madam Speaker. So hence the reason why I think the opposition must understand that whistleblowing legislation aims to a large extent at encouraging the disclosure of information of the public interest. Public interest is for the greater good, and I will continue hammering on that because they seem to be very parochial in their vision and understanding and very narrow-minded in their deliberation. So, Madam Speaker, it is about the public interest. And this usually means providing safe channels of disclosure, safeguarding whistleblowers from relationships, and rewarding them for their actions, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Transparency International cites whistleblowing as one of the key triggers for effective corruption investigation. I repeat that, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Transparency International cites whistleblowing as one of the key triggers for effective corruption investigation. Whistleblowing is one method of uncovering corruption in the public and private sector organizations. Indeed, Madam Speaker, whistleblowing may be seen as among the most effective means to expose and remedy corruption, fraud, and other types of wrongdoing in the public and private sector. Madam Speaker, I don't think anyone can argue about that. It has been proven, it has been tested, it's happening in other jurisdictions. Why not in Trinidad and Tobago? Why not in Trinidad and Tobago, Madam Speaker? The G20 Anti-Corruption Working Group has noted that corruption threatens the integrity of markets, undermines fair competitions, distorts resource allocation, destroys public trust, and undermines the rule of law. Madam Speaker, corruption is a severe impediment to economic growth, and we have seen it. We've seen it happen in both in developing countries and developed countries. So therefore, a call for effective whistleblowing laws has increased in the international conventions against corruption. And you hear it in almost any international convention on corruptions. There'll always be a call for whistleblower legislation. There'll always be a call for whistleblowing laws when you're treating with fraud and mismanagement. And most countries have responded, Madam Speaker. Most countries responded by creating new whistleblowing laws to improving the existing laws. And again, as I said, it's not a final fix. There's always improvement in whistleblowing laws, and you've seen it in all the jurisdictions that started before us. They continue to improve their whistleblowing laws because the environment changes. The environment is not static, it changes. And so the laws that we bring, the bill that we bring today is subject to change in the future, subject to amendment in the future. So whereas you may take it as is, understand that there's always room to improvement at the site, because there are new fraud being committed almost daily, you know. We're exposed right now to, so sometimes, as we get up tomorrow, there's a different kind of fraud being committed in Trinidad and Tobago. Yeah, we have seen it, yes. Venezuela, we had one with 120 credit cards the other day. False cards. And then it used to happen in Trinidad and Tobago before. So that, and as the environment changes, we amend the laws accordingly, but we have to have a foundation and a start. And what this bill gives us, Madam Speaker, is a start to introduce whistleblowing legislation in Trinidad and Tobago. Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the past 10 to 15 years, the need to enact and enforce whistleblowing laws has become one of the most prominent issues nationally and internationally in the global fight against corruption. The United Nations Secretary General, Madam Speaker, in a debate hosted for the 15th anniversary of the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, remarked that corruption is neither an acceptable cost of doing business nor a necessary evil. It is a serious crime and simply unacceptable. He emphasized that we need civil society, a free press, and young people to continue doing their valuable work in bringing to light corrupt practices and hold individuals, business, and governments to account. He further stated that whistleblower legislation is the world's most agile instrument in the hands of the international community to achieve common goals of good governance, stability, and prosperity. Madam Speaker, if governments are serious about doing the best for the citizens, and this government is serious, Madam Speaker, then we pledge to promote integrity and clamp down on corruption. We must, Madam Speaker, introduce bills such as the whistleblower bill, Madam Speaker, because this is a serious government, Madam Speaker. This is one that is determined to ensure that we rid as much as possible, if not eliminate totally, the whole aspect of corruption in our workplace, in our society, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the bill deals with challenges inherent in whistleblowing to combat corruption. It is in the context that this legislation, the Whistleblower Bill 2018, has been developed, Madam Speaker. It's really targeting at corruption. And when you look at corruption, don't look at it in isolation. Corruption goes across the entire landscape. If you look at the basket of security issues, Madam Speaker, if you look at the basket of security issues, it touches on almost every single item, from the lowest level to the highest level, from the blue-collar crime to the yellow-collar, to the white-collar crime. It touches on all of them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, when you look at the bill itself, you can look at various clauses that have been there to treat with those issues. Now look at Clause 7, Madam Speaker, and let's look at Clause 7. Clause 7, Madam Speaker, provides for reporting improper conduct, which is part of the title of the bill, by enabling disclosure of improper conduct to a designated whistleblowing reporting officer or whistleblowing reporting unit. And the member for Caroni Central spoke about institution and the mechanism put in place. Again, when you look at the bill, the mechanism put in place in terms of the reporting officer, in terms of the reporting unit. Those are two mechanisms by which the whistleblowers can report the necessary information or intelligence what they have. So there is a reporting officer that's named in the bill. There is a whistleblowing reporting unit that's there in the bill. So the structure is there. Again, whether it's skeleton or otherwise, we can build on it as we go along, but the structure is in place. And I heard the member for Caroni Central speak to the fact that there isn't a structure in place and so forth and so on. But the bill speaks to the structure, Madam Speaker. It speaks to the structure. It speaks to, let me see if I can quickly. I know it has been there and it is there. Yes, it speaks to a whistleblowing reporting officer, which means such officer within the organization appointed under Section 11.1. Whistleblowing reporting unit means a unit of a designated authority established under Section 14. So that the structure is in place within the bill itself, Madam Speaker. So Clause 7 really talks about it. At Clause 8, Madam Speaker, it talks about that the disclosure is protected if it is made in good faith or is not made for the purpose of personal gain. So, Madam Speaker, it also tells you the kind of character that we're looking at in terms of the whistleblower himself or herself. Not someone that is looking for personal gain out of what they're contributing to the disclosures. Disclosures are also protected if the whistleblower reasonably believes the information disclosed and any allegations contained in it are substantially true and tends to show that his employer, another employee of his employer, or a person acting on his employer's behalf, is engaged or preparing to engage in improper conduct. So, Madam Speaker, you can see that Clause 7, Clause 8 touches on the mechanism itself and what should be done insofar as the whistleblower is concerned. When one looks at Clause 11 to 23, and I go in, Clause 11 to 23 establishes the procedures for the whistleblowing process is to take place. So therefore, we talk about the structure. It's covered in the bill. We're talking about the process. The process is covered under Section 11 to 23. Clause 12 details a requirement for employer to establish and publish operational internal procedures for dealing with disclosures and to identify the whistleblowing reporting officer. So, Madam Speaker, the bill, when you look at the bill in its entirety, structures in place, process in place, mechanism in place, Madam Speaker, and other clauses deal with the procedures to notify whistleblowers as to the status of the complaint and so on. And Madam Speaker, to allay the fears of whistleblowers, the whistleblowing reporting officer is strictly prohibited from revealing the identity of a whistleblower. So there's protection again in terms of the identity of the whistleblower. So there is, in fact, a protection in terms of the identity without his prior consent. So again, Madam Speaker, I go back to Member for Caroni Central who talks about protection of the whistleblower. Clause 14 of the bill requires a designated authority to establish a whistleblowing report unit consisting of a director and other such officers as required for the efficient performance function of the unit. Structure again in place. Each unit within a designated authority has responsibility for receiving and processing external disclosures from whistleblowing reports officers on matters within its purview. These designated authorities are listed in the schedule of the bill and encompass the entire gamut of institutions from financial to environmental which would deal with whistleblowing reports related. So, Madam Speaker.
Member for Point 14.
Yeah.
Your original time is now expired. You're entitled 15 more minutes to complete your presentation if you wish.
Thank you, Madam
You may
Speaker.
proceed.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, thank you very much. Madam Speaker, each unit within a designated authority has responsibility for receiving and processing external disclosures from whistleblowing reporting officers on matters within its purview. So again, I emphasize this in terms of structures, processes, all within the bill, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in some countries, there's a dedicated governmental whistleblowing agency. However, other countries like United Kingdom and Jamaica have legislation that provides for prescribed persons to receive reports and investigate wrongdoing. So there are different ways in which you can achieve the same means. Some countries have gone that way, and others have gone a different way. We in Trinidad and Tobago has it laid out quite succinctly, quite clearly in the bill itself, Madam Speaker. A review of an explanatory document on the Protected Disclosure Act 2011, produced by the Commission for the Prevention of Corruption in Jamaica, indicates that there are many similarities in the Act to the contents of the Whistleblower Act of 2018. So, Madam Speaker, as I said, we're not reinventing the wheel, we're improving on the wheel as we go along, because there are other jurisdictions that have gone this way before us, and therefore we're not starting from ground zero. We have looked and see what have been done in other jurisdictions, and we're improving on that as we go along. Just as we improve the legislation, Madam Speaker, the key to the effectiveness of this legislation would be the implementation of provisions of the Act, especially as they relate to the encouragement and protection of whistleblowers. Madam Speaker, clearly, it is clear in our mind on this side of the House that we're at a stage insofar as crime and criminality in our society, in Trinidad and Tobago, that this bill will be a game changer. It will help. And I said, let us not view this bill in isolation. Let's not feel that this will be the panacea for everything. It cannot be. No bill can do that. No law can do that. No entity can do that. But it must be taken as a collective, as part of a whole, part of a wider whole. And when one looks at the suite of legislation that the Attorney General has brought to this House, Madam Speaker, he has done a wonderful job, Madam Speaker. He has done an amazing job, Madam Speaker. And this is just another part of the pie that he's brought together to treat the issues of crime and criminality in Trinidad and Tobago. So, Madam Speaker, let me say again, and I always like to hit the note, that if we understand what our roles are in this House, both on the government side and on the opposition side, it's about bringing to this House legislation for the betterment of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. It is not about opposing. There's contribution, yes, but when we see the wider good, and I mentioned, I draw reference from all the legislation, Jamaica, New Zealand, Canada, And each of them said, it is in the public interest, Madam Speaker. So what we're doing today, let us have in the back of our heads, let us have in our hearts, in our minds, that whatever we do, how we contribute, it is not our interest, but it is in the public interest of Trinidad and Tobago that we are passing this bill here today. Madam Speaker, I thank you very much.
Arisano.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was recognized. Madam Speaker, I've listened intently to the member for Point Fortin, and the only thing came to my mind is fortune cookie. When I said fortune cookie, I mean when you open a fortune cookie, Madam Speaker, you see all these phrases, but they mean absolutely nothing. Public interest, public good, public this, public that. So I was thinking more or less like a fortune cookie representation. You see, Madam Speaker, this bill in front of us, I cannot understand how somebody could look at this bill and say it's in the public interest. It's not. And I will show you and I'll demonstrate why it's not in the public interest. You see, Madam Speaker, it's a nice way to speak about how, it's corruption and we're going after corruption and the suite of legislations and and we keep running along that road. Madam Speaker, when you look at this suite of legislation, especially this whistleblower legislation, it reminds me, Madam Speaker, about the Spanish Inquisition. If you remember the Spanish Inquisition in the old days, Madam Speaker, you remember during the Spanish Inquisition, people were burnt at the stake who were not witches because of whistleblowers. They were burnt at the stake.
No, history. No, just now. I can see.
Yeah, sorry, Madam Speaker.
I
Standing
didn't
order
give way.
48 what? It was not give way, it was a standing order.
Okay, so Member for Barataria San, I'll give you a little leeway to bring your fortune cookies and your Spanish Inquisition into this.
Madam Speaker, I'm building up to a serious point, Madam Speaker, as I usually do.
But continue.
You see, Madam Speaker, after listening to this debate today, I've always said, and the conclusion is this, that when we're in opposition, we become the opposition. And when we're in government, we become the government. And listening to most of the government speakers here today, I realized that they are towing a line, not understanding what the line it is that they are towing. You see, Madam Speaker, towing a line is one thing, but understanding a line is another. And when we talk about constitutional reform, we talk about changing the whole dynamics of our parliament. And it's important, Madam Speaker, so we could have different level of thinking. And I'm coming to a thought pattern that is a different thought pattern as what has been presented today. Madam Speaker, I'll show you something. When you look at the okay, I'll try my best not to stay on course and not in fortune cookie. I'll try my best also, Madam Speaker, to make sure that I don't incur the wrath of the Speaker. Right. Madam Speaker, I'll stick to the legislation. Now, when I read this legislation, it sounded good on the surface. It sounded so good when you looked at the label of
You might realize it, but I'm being disturbed. And I would really like to hear the fortune cookies tie up into the debate. Barataria San.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. When you look at this bill and you look at an act to combat corruption, corruption is bold. So if you're a speed reader, you will not read everything else. You talk about other wrongdoings by encouraging and facilitating disclosures of improper conduct in the public and private sector to protect persons making these disclosures from detrimental action, regulating and receiving, and you go on. You see, Madam Speaker, Section 7, Part 2. An employee of an organization may make a disclosure of improper conduct to a whistleblowing reporting officer or a whistleblowing report unit where he has reasonable grounds to believe that improper conduct has occurred, is occurring, or is likely to occur within the organization. Now, Madam Speaker, when you look at this, you're hearing has occurred, is occurring, and is likely to occur. So you are supposing that it will occur. So so you're starting off by saying, I feel and I suppose that this will occur, so I'm going to report it to the whistleblowing agency. Number 2 says, a disclosure under Section 1 may be made although the employee is not able to identify a particular person to which the disclosure relates. So I am going to say, I can't identify the person, but I think he's doing this or she's doing this. And what sense does that make? I find it makes absolutely no sense. Somebody could just walk into a whistleblower reporting agency and say, I think this is occurring, but I can't identify who, what, where, how. But I believe it might be occurring. So you see, Madam Speaker, when you look at Section 2A, then you look at Section 2B, all of the improper conduct occurred before and the coming into the force of this act. It happened before, where is it happening, will it happen, and putting the two of them together, you are supposing something will occur prior to coming into order or after. Madam Speaker, people are forgetting this is Trinidad, you know. This is Trinidad and Tobago. This is not Malta. This is not United Kingdom. This is not United States. This is not wherever, Canada. I think we have lost the ability to think that we are still a small country sitting down in the middle of the ocean and just with 1 million people. You see, Madam Speaker, it's all well and good for these things to occur in a major country because they have buffers. We have a system in this country where somebody gets the head blown off and you can't find who it is. You find somebody, if you look at them too hard or tell them you're bad driving, they come out and shoot you. And at the end of the day, Madam Speaker, nobody's been found, not any great extent. This is Trinidad and Tobago as we have it. Now, I'm going to show you what this whistleblowing and this suite of legislation is going to do to the economy of this country. And I'm going to talk about improper conduct. Improper conduct means any criminal offense, anything. B, failure to carry out legal obligation. C, conduct that is likely to result in a miscarriage of justice. Conduct that is likely to threaten the health or safety of a person. That is the OSH law. But now you have somebody whistleblowing on an employer, an employee whistleblowing on an employer. Conduct that is now F, conduct that shows gross mismanagement, impropriety, or misconduct in the carrying out of any activity that involves use of public funds. Madam Speaker, if you buy a boat, that is a waste of time, cannot ride the waves to Tobago, is that mismanagement? So therefore you're misusing public funds. So a whistleblower could come and say, that boat that you bought, which you bought with good intentions, I think the Minister of Finance bought it with good intentions, and at the end of the day, it could be considered mismanagement or abuse of public funds. So that person is subjected to the whistleblowing law, which makes no sense, Madam Speaker. I mean, the whole idea of how it's done here and recorded, and then G, act of reprisal against or victimization of a whistleblower or a person related to or associated with a whistleblower. So if you were a whistleblower, somebody could report that somebody is doing the whistleblower or something. So you have a chain of events, like a chain. Whistleblower, anti-whistleblower, whistleblower, and you keep going down the road, Madam Speaker. H, conduct that intends to show unfair discrimination. And I want you to listen to this, Madam Speaker. Conduct that tends to show unfair discrimination on the basis of gender, race, place of origin, social class, color, religion, or political opinion, or you go to I. But I would like to see this one. So therefore, what they said, I think that should be placed here, that you cannot discriminate against somebody based on their age or their sexual orientation. So you have now left out, purposely, somebody could discriminate against somebody in improper conduct on their age and their sexual orientation. So you've left that open. Why was that not put in here? Because that is what has occurred in this country and other countries, and I'm quite certain it's in the United States legislation. And it's purposely left out. You see, Madam Speaker, I think that is a deficiency of this legislation, that where you must have in it, as in proper conduct, where you should not be able to discriminate against a person because of their age or their sexual orientation, Madam Speaker. And I feel very strongly about that. And then you have willful concealment, etc., etc. Madam Speaker, you could imagine an employer being faced with this act, this bill becomes an act, it becomes assented to, becomes proclaimed, and you have all the employees now being protected to really and truly attack the employer. And they are protected to such an extent, well, not like witness protection where they die, but at least they're protected here. They are protected to such an extent that they can now go into a whistleblowing agency, whistleblowing place, and say, based on all these improper conducts, anything, this is happening in my employee and my place of employment. I could see, Madam Speaker, and I could see, and it may sound far-fetched, that the futuristic action of this kind of legislation, together with the civil asset forfeiture, together with the NGO Act and as a suite of legislation, is a complete destruction of the economy, and also you will have closures of businesses to just get away from this, capital flight because they're going to leave the country, and migration. This is what you're going to have. People are going to leave this country if they are not starting to do it already. Banks are going to close, and they are closing. Don't laugh. Don't laugh. The banks, Madam Speaker, are coalescing themselves, and they're leaving. They're shutting down, and the Minister of Finance is unaware of that. I don't know what country he's living in. You see, Madam Speaker, this kind of legislation will destroy the informal economy. And when you go after the informal economy, Madam Speaker, which is about 70% of the economy that's not seen, you are going to make the formal economy will eventually dip. I'm not crazy. I think you're, I was going to say stupid.
Minister of Finance, please. All right, so just, withdraw that, all right, and don't be misled.
Madam Speaker, somehow he just gets under my
both of us can't be on our legs. I know you know better than this. Don't be misled, and please kind of train your ears this way so that you won't be distracted.
Madam Speaker, I have a problem. I don't hear in this ear and I hear very good in this ear. I have one ear. I hear very good in my left ear. I hardly hear in my right ear. All right, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I would like to inform the Minister of Finance, since he is an engineer, and I don't think he studied much finance, but I knew for a fact he is there. Madam Speaker, these kinds of legislation in a small economy, I'm not talking about a big economy with buffers. These types of legislation is all well and good against certain things, yes. And you will hear about it throughout the whole system of Transparency International and every single thing. However, Madam Speaker, you would look at this sort of legislation, employees are going to snitch on employers in any form or fashion. It's going to be a snitch society, and at the end of the day, all these parameters are going to be used to attack the employer, because if you fire somebody for pilferage or something, they go towards the whistleblowing agency and you start the process. So an employer in Trinidad and Tobago, or somebody in Trinidad and Tobago who says to them, I am not going to put up with this anymore, I've had enough of this Spanish type of Inquisition and this type of Nazism and fascism, I am going to make sure that I am leaving this country. I will be migrating, taking my children out and taking it, and this is what they will say. And the banking system, Madam Speaker, I'll tell you something. When you have these types of legislation, it's destruction of the informal economy, which is the people who have the cash moving around. They are not going to bank no cash. They're not going to put it in the banks. They're going to just take it and move it out of the country, as is being done as we speak. So we are looking at a piece of legislation that is destroying our economy, destroying our informal economy, and destroying Trinidad and Tobago, because nobody, Madam Speaker, right now is purchasing properties. The bank is making it difficult because of, as I say, the source of funds, etc. You see, Madam Speaker, the economy is contracting, but yet the Minister of Finance is saying that it's booming. I don't understand where is the boom, except there's an explosion coming at us, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, in all good sense and fairness, looking at this legislation, and I'm looking at it as a piece of legislation that is going to destroy the economy, as well as run people off the country, Madam Speaker, destroy the journalism, proper journalism, together with suites of legislation, Madam Speaker. I cannot see this being in the public interest, and as a result of that, Madam Speaker, I will not be supporting this legislation. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Member for Caroni East.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I don't know what arrangements were being made, but I thought the government chief whip was going to end, so I didn't hear anything, so I stood up to speak. I don't know. I recognize you. Right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I will first start by indicating that there was some confusion as to which bill that we were going to discuss. And the Attorney General indicated when some of my colleagues spoke about the bill, he said that was the old bill, and this is the new bill. But we are not aware of when this new bill was put on. I saw this on my desk this morning, and this is the bill of number 8 of 2018, and that is the bill that we had, and we had been using the bill number 8 of 2018 to form our discussions in relation to the debate today. And let me congratulate my colleagues, all of whom did a lot of work and research and critical analysis of all 29 clauses in the bill and put forward very cogent statements and arguments supporting some areas within the bill and not supporting some other areas within the bill. So we ought to congratulate them for the tremendous work they did. And of course, let me congratulate my colleague, former Minister Khan, a member for Barataria, on some of the statements that he made there just a while ago. Madam Speaker, I find it difficult to understand and appreciate how is it that the Attorney General and the government can come today and want us to focus on passing this piece of legislation when, as he had admitted in his presentation, that the work on this bill started in December 2015 and had gone through a period within the JSC and came up to a conclusion that there was clear evidence that there would be no conclusion because one of our members was not in agreement with some of the areas which were being discussed in the Joint Select Committee. And he gave a little itinerary of the times that the committee met and so on, and so therefore, why did they stop the committee when there was a first interim report on the 22nd of January 2016, the date they presented in the House? Then an extension was granted until 22nd of March with a second interim report on the 18th of March 2016. Then a third interim report, extension granted till the 17th of June 2016. A fourth interim report on the 17th of June, an extension granted till the 9th of September. And a fifth interim report, the 9th of September 2016, extension granted till the 9th of October 2016. And following the presentation of the fifth interim report, a final report was never presented before the end of the session on 19 September 2016. So this bill was lost because the Joint Select Committee never continued its work. And why was that so? Why did the Joint Select Committee continue its work so that the Honorable Attorney General could have come with confidence and say These were the deliberations of the Joint Select Committee. We had a number of submissions and recommendations, and they were trashed out, and the CPC and all the advisors came to the conclusion that this should be the bill. But unfortunately, that is not the situation. I can't see any evidence that deliberations took place successfully for him to bring and present this bill to the House. So it's a, yeah.
It is now 5:30. We shall take the suspension now. We shall return at 6 o'clock.
Yeah, David.
While viewing a sitting of the House of Representatives or the Senate, you may have noticed someone walk into the Parliament chamber holding a metal staff over his right shoulder while announcing the arrival of the presiding officer. Either gold or silver in color, this staff is known as a ceremonial mace, and its presence in the Parliament chamber symbolizes the authority and privileges of the House. The origins of the ceremonial mace date back to the 13th century, when the mace was used